Sometime later, Sunny exited the instructor's lounge. The clear winter day welcomed him with chilly wind and tiny snowflakes dancing in the sunlight, despite being dressed very lightly. His skin was covered only by the soft fabric of the simple training suit provided to him by the staff of the Academy Hospital complex. Sunny did not feel too cold. He muttered to himself that that was being awakened for you, he guessed. If it had been a year and a few months ago, he would have been desperately searching for shelter, hoping that he would not freeze to death overnight or, even worse, get sick. But now, Sunny felt great. He wasn't even uncomfortable. Pulling down his sleeves to hide the serpent tattoo, he inhaled the cool, perfectly filtered air, smiled, and started walking. He mused aloud about decisions. The conversation with Master Jet had been useful, but left him with more questions than answers. Each of the choices presented to him had alluring benefits, but also very serious drawbacks. He wondered to himself whether it would be great clans, lesser clans, government, or independent. Sunny tried to imagine himself as a legacy and silently shook his head. All that prestige, all that wealth, the admiration of the masses. Being a legacy meant being a part of the nobility, the elite above all elites. It was the exact opposite of what Sunny had been all his life. But who said that he had to remain the same in the future? From a pauper to a prince, that would be a nice transformation. Lord Sunless. That had a nice ring to it, didn't it? There were serious disadvantages to making such a choice, of course. Working for the government offered its own advantages, but at the cost of not receiving as much funds and resources, while being tied down by too many obligations. Both times Sunny had met Master Jet, she seemed busy and overworked. He couldn't imagine pursuing his goals with such a schedule. One of the functions of the awakened forces in service to the government was hunting down rogue members of their own kind. Awakened were people, after all, and there were criminals among them, too, especially because many were traumatized and driven to the edge of madness by their experiences in the nightmares and the dream realm. If Sunny could absorb the essence of those humans he killed like all the other awakened, that path could have offered him a faster track to saturating his cores. But as it was, he didn't see himself putting on the uniform, unless there were new gates opening every day, thus providing him with the endless supply of nightmare creatures to hunt. By the way, how many gates were opening in a given year on average? Suddenly, Sunny realized that he had no idea. The propaganda never mentioned concrete numbers, only the fact that Valiant Awakened had the situation under control. Did they really? The last option was to remain independent. That choice was seemingly in contradiction to his desire to acquire status and as many benefits as possible, but only on the surface. In fact, Sunny had already received most of what he wanted by becoming a high-ranking citizen and getting a free pick of any citadel. Of course, not having the vast resources of a legacy clan or the government would be a huge loss. But it would also provide the best chance he had to keep all his secrets to himself. All three options were worthy of being considered. In the end, it all came to the fact that he simply didn't have enough information to make a decision. So, getting information was his first priority. But how? He wondered aloud what it was called, a library, and whether the academy had to have one of those. Sunny, of course, had never been to a library, but he was familiar with the concept. There were similar types of public terminals in the outskirts, too, although using them cost credits. He had never had any to spare, so his visits were few and far between, and he went there for entertainment, not to study. Now that Sunny had himself a state-of-the-art communicator, he could access a lot of information from the network, but doing so would doubtlessly leave a digital trail behind. Considering that some of the topics he wanted to research were rather dangerous, he wanted to remain as anonymous as possible. He decided that a library it was. 10 minutes later, he approached a square white building. Like most of the academy, its walls were made out of smooth, pristine alloy with wide windows that could be covered at any moment with reinforced shutters. There weren't many people in sight, so Sunny assumed that the library was not a popular destination among the awakened. Why would it be, if most of the information stored there could be accessed remotely? He was the weirdo for coming here in person. Entering through an automatic door, Sunny looked around and blinked a couple of times. Everywhere he looked, Tall shelves full of paper books stretched into the distance. Between them stood tables meant for study, with several young men and women reading behind them silently. Most of them were using terminals to take notes, but some were actually writing by hand. He stared and muttered under his breath, wondering what the hell that was. All those books, of course, were printed on synthetic paper. But why have them printed at all? Wouldn't it be way more convenient to read from a terminal, like all normal people did? He had never seen a physical book in his life. The very idea of using one was mind-boggling. But then, it made sense. Digital data storage technology was highly advanced, but susceptible to various types of damage during the dark times, which came before the even darker times of the nightmare spell, back when humanity had been consumed by an endless series of devastating wars and cataclysmic natural disasters. A lot of knowledge had been lost due to over-reliance on digital mediums. Whole layers of culture were irrevocably gone as the result. Paper was still the safest way to preserve knowledge. It's just Sunny had never thought about it before. He still found it weird, though. Trying to not show his confusion, Sunny furtively looked around and noticed a member of the library staff. It was a young man. No, wait, a young woman. A young person with short black hair and intelligent brown eyes, who was currently reading a vintage-looking book. There was a badge on her chest with the name Ren written on it. At least Sunny thought that it was a name. Maybe it was some weird title among the librarians. Who knew what kind of strange customs they had here? Approaching the young librarian, he stopped a couple of meters away and waited patiently to be noticed. However, Ren continued to read, fully engrossed in whatever story the book told, eyes full of deep emotion. Curious, Sunny looked at the title on the cover, Free Fall. He thought it sounded familiar. He mused that it must be a really great book and maybe he should read it someday. Sunny cleared his throat and asked if he could get some directions. Ren lingered for a couple of seconds, then reluctantly put down the novel and looked at him with a neutral smile.
Of course, how can I help you?
He lingered for a bit, then said with uncertainty,
How can I read about the dream realm and the current state of human expansion into its various regions?
Ren blinked a couple of times, then asked politely,
Can you be more specific?
Sunny sighed.
I want to see a map and a list of all the citadels out there, as well as learn who owns what and why, I guess.
The librarian smiled brightly.
You are a lover of history as well. Of course, you have come to the right place. We have all the records you'll ever need here, Nickel.
Sunny flinched. He wondered in alarm what Nickel meant and what was happening. Suddenly, another young librarian appeared out of nowhere. This one was definitely a guy wearing a wrinkled white shirt and a brown vest. He was tall and handsome, with slightly disheveled red hair, scruffy bristle on his chin, and a friendly face. There was a badge on his vest, too, with the word Nickel written on it. The two were a strange pair.
Nickel, could you please escort this young man to the Dream Realm History section?
The tall librarian glanced at Sunny and gave him a wide smile.
Sure, please follow me.
They headed into the depths of the library, leaving Ren behind. A few moments later, Sunny heard the rustle of paper pages coming from behind. The smaller librarian was once again engrossed in the book. He thought to himself that he should definitely check that novel out, since a citizen of the 7th rank should be well read. Nickel led him through the library, asking a few questions to narrow down the search. Soon, they arrived in front of a particular set of shelves, full of books having to do with the dream realm and the history of humanity's slow exploration of it. The young man helped Sunny select a few, wished him luck, and disappeared as quietly and swiftly as he had appeared. Sunny looked at the spot where Nickel had been just a few moments ago, then slowly shook his head. He mused that a librarian like that guy could have been an assassin instead. Well, maybe he was. Come to think about it. Working in a library could be a perfect cover for clandestine operators. He wondered to himself, half-jokingly, that maybe he should become a librarian too, making sure that no one was watching him. Sunny put his books on a nearby table and walked back to the shelves. There, He stared at a certain book that he had noticed a few minutes ago. Its title was simple: The Immortal Flame. Sunny hesitated for a bit, and then took the book off the shelf. He was pretty sure that the sovereigns were at least partially responsible for the fall of Nef's clan. If so, there had to be some hints of their identity in the history of the Immortal Flame. He told himself that this had to be a good place to start looking for some answers. A quick word before we press on. If the nightmare has its hooks in you tonight, do me a kindness. Tap like, hit subscribe, and we will face whatever comes next together. Now back into it. Sunny brought the book back to the table and sat down, looking at the plain cover with a complicated expression. Of course, he knew a few things about the Immortal Flame clan. Everybody did, considering how prominent the achievements of its members were. Even though Sunny missed out on receiving a proper education, the legendary figures of Changing Star's father and grandfather had long ago found their way from the pages of history into the popular culture. Their names were pretty much synonymous with heroism and the indomitable nature of the human spirit, famously painted with a tinge of tragedy. Immortal Flame was the first awakened to become a master, and Broken Sword, his son-in-law, was the first master to become a saint. Of course, they had not done so alone. Each had a group of powerful companions to share the burden of challenging the spell. So, more proper statement would have been that they were the leaders of the first cohorts to conquer the second and third nightmares. However, the names of their comrades were not as well known. Sunny was sure that kids learned about them in school, but a street rat like him only had a general impression of who they were. Mostly, he just remembered that some of them would go on to establish the great clans. But that was the thing about heroes. Sunny had once told Effie that one had to die to become a hero. And that was not a joke. A person could possess renown and respect for achieving something incredible, but it was the act of making the ultimate sacrifice that elevated one to heroic status. That's why the Immortal Flame clan was revered much more than the other great clans. Not only because the leaders of those cohorts came from it, but also because it had a tragic end. Or had it? If Nephi's did manage to return to the real world, the fame of her clan would burn bright once again. Perhaps even brighter than ever before. The survivors of the Dreamer army already treated her like a deity. With a sudden frown, Sunny awkwardly opened the book and started reading. Accustomed to reading off a screen, he struggled for a bit with the printed text, but then quickly got used to it and engrossed himself in the illustrious history of the famed clan. The first part was dedicated to Immortal Flame himself, and although it was interesting, there was not a lot of information there that Sunny could use. He already knew that Nef's grandfather had been among the first wave of people infected by the nightmare spell, and that he fought against the nightmare creatures during the initial mayhem that followed its appearance. Back then, millions of people were suddenly thrust into the first nightmares and died, resulting in millions of nightmare creatures entering the real world. Of course, almost all of them were only of the dormant rank. But even that turned out to be too much for the armies of the already reeling humanity to handle. Whole nations were destroyed, and for a while the planet was submerged into absolute chaos. It was only thanks to people like Immortal Flame, who had not earned his true name yet back then, of course, that the situation changed. There were those who had survived the first nightmare, then entered the dream realm and carved their path to gateways. After returning to the real world, they united and fought back against the tide of nightmare creatures, eventually establishing a new world order, the one that existed to this day. He reflected that they were tough people. Becoming an awakened was hard enough even today, with all the accumulated knowledge about the spell being freely accessible to everyone. Back when it first appeared, people like Immortal Flame didn't know anything. They didn't know what an aspect was, how many ranks and classes of the nightmare creatures were there, what they meant, what the memories and echoes were, what a gateway was. Most important of all, they didn't even know if saving humanity was even possible. And yet, somehow, they learned and fought back. Sunny couldn't imagine how dark and hellish that time must have been. Truly, they deserved his respect. But sadly, they didn't deserve his time. At least not now. He had much more pressing things on his plate, so Sunny just skimmed through the pages describing Immortal Flame's life, his eventual triumph over the second nightmare and heroic death. The legendary master died defending the evacuating cities from the onslaught of terrible creatures that entered the real world through a Category 5 gate. That happened just a year or so before Sunny was born, and had cost humanity an entire continent. It was also the event that led to Neff's mother becoming hollow, although that tragedy was not described in the book in great detail. All that was said about it was that Smile of Heaven died during the disaster while protecting civilians. Sunny sighed, then concentrated on reading about Broken Sword. Neff's father was not a legacy by birth. In fact, he came from a very humble background and rose from absolute obscurity to the very pinnacle of prominence thanks only to his talent and battle genius. He was a pauper who had won the heart of a princess and became the heir of the most venerated clan in human history. The narrative of the book framed the history in a way that suggested that Broken Sword had been heartbroken by the death of his wife, and that it was this loss that drove him to rise even higher and challenge the third nightmare. Miraculously, Broken Sword succeeded, becoming the first saint. There was no happy end to his story, though. Just a few years later, he perished in the dream realm while exploring a region that would later be categorized as a death zone. The book ended with a long-winded tribute to the two legendary heroes and an explanation of how important their contributions were to the survival and future prosperity of the human race. Sunny closed the book and shook his head. He thought to himself, bitterly, that it was a load of crap. He might not have been educated, but like most people in the outskirts, Sunny had the instinctive skill of recognizing propaganda and reading between the lines of official statements. And this was what the book was, an embellished, partially fictional version of events that the government liked to feed to people. The truth was hard to come by. There were several things about the supposed history of the Immortal Flame clan that didn't make a lot of sense to Sunny. The first one was the circumstances of Smile of Heaven's tragic death. On paper, everything seemed fine, but Sunny knew that she was not in fact dead. Not in the traditional sense of the word, at least. She was hollow. But how could she become hollow? According to the book, at that point in time, Broken Sword had already become a master. The two of them were partners both in life and in battle, leading their cohort together. That would suggest that Smile of Heaven was a master too. But masters traveled to the dream realm physically as opposed to in spirit, like sleepers and awakened did. There would have been no soulless body left behind if she had died there, so how was it possible? He muttered to himself that the timeline didn't add up. The second questionable point was Broken Sword's own death. Saints were extremely powerful beings, and killing one was not an easy task. Even when met with an overwhelming foe, a saint should have been able to at least escape. Saints simply did not die unless they had a reason to stand their ground and fight to the last breath. The only creatures that could kill them instantly were too powerful and rare to stumble on one randomly. Even when exploring an unknown region of the dream realm, would Broken Sword have been so reckless and stubborn, knowing that he had a daughter who needed his care and protection? The legendary swordsman didn't strike Sunny as someone who would allow himself to die easily, unless some other forces were involved. And finally, there were the other members of his cohort. Sunny whispered their names.
Broken Sword, Smile of Heaven, Asterion, Kaisong, Anvil of the Valor clan.
Asterion, Kaisong, Anvil of Valor.
Aster's Song, Vale.
Sunny spent several hours reading the book about the history of the Immortal Clan book, and now, finally, he was starting to feel sleepy. Not to the point of needing to use the stimulants provided to him by Master Jet, but enough to make it harder for him to concentrate. Rubbing his face, he mentally repeated the names of Broken Sword's companions, the brilliant warriors who had become the first saints of the human race. Asterion, Kaisong, Anvil of the Valor clan. Were they the Aster? Song and Vale? While not exactly the same, the names of the members of the legendary cohort were too similar to the three words that Nephi's had once told him to never say out loud, among a couple of others, to be merely a coincidence. He thought to himself, let's see, what did he really know about all that stuff? Sunny knew that the three words held enough meaning to free Neph from the haze of the Soul Devourer's mind hex, at least partially. She had reacted to them very strongly. So much so that Sun had actually been afraid for his life for a bit there. She had also asked him a strange question. He repeated it mentally, careful to not say anything out loud. "Which domain do you belong to?" Sunny had had no idea what a capital letter domain was back then, and he didn't know now. But he was indeed sure that there was a capital letter there. He also suspected that people who had been trying to kill Nephis for most of her life were connected to these mysterious domains, which meant that Castor had been too. From that, it wasn't hard to conclude that domains and sovereigns, who apparently willed the destruction of the immortal Flame clan, were tied together, or more likely the same. And all of it had something to do with lineage memories and the attributes they bestowed, like the fire attribute that was described as the lineage of the sun god, or his own blood weave, which was apparently both incomplete and forbidden. Sunny massaged his temples and sighed. For a long time, he had no clue about what Aster, Song, and Veil meant. But after meeting Saitian, an adopted daughter of the great clan Song, he began to suspect that they were the names of the 3 legacy clans responsible for the numerous attempts on Neph's life, and maybe even the deaths of her parents and the downfall of the immortal Flame clan. Not only because of his inherent dislike of legacies, but also because of how peculiar Changing Star had described her relationship with the Handmaiden.
Trusted, not really, never actually.
Why would Nephis say that she would never ever trust Saitian? Maybe it was because Saitian belonged to one of the clans responsible for the undoing of her family. That was a logical assumption. But now, Sunny saw that maybe he was wrong. Maybe Aster, Song, and Veil weren't the names of clans. Maybe these were the nicknames belonging to 3 people, Asterion, Kai Song, and Anvil of Clan Valor. They were Broken Sword's companions, and as such, Nephis had to have met them a lot before her father died. Neither Broken Sword himself nor his daughter would have been addressing them by their full names, either. What would she call them? Uncle Aster, Auntie Song. Sunny looked down, a dark expression appearing on his face. If these were really the people that had later sent numerous assassins to hunt down the little girl who trusted them, then the hatred Nephis had for them would be easy to explain. It would also be easy to explain how a saint of Broken Sword's talent and might had died. Maybe he had been stabbed in the back by the people he trusted the most. Even though there was no proof, it all made too much sense. Sunny felt that he was on the right track. But how were Asterion, Kai Song, and Anvil of Clan Valor connected to the mysterious sovereigns? Did they serve them, or? His eyes widened. A terrible suspicion entered his mind. Not a suspicion, a certainty. He thought with dawning horror that it was them. They were the sovereigns. The revelation hit him like a hurricane squall, too vast to comprehend all at once. And the key to it was a simple sentence that Nephis had once told him while overwhelmed by intense emotions. How did he miss it? Back when they had their falling out in a deserted alley of the outer settlement, Neph said,
You think Gunlog can stop me? You think a fallen terror can stop me? Those 3 ghouls can stop me? No, Sunny, nothing will stop me. Anyone who dares will die. I'll kill them all.
She had listed her enemies. She listed them in the order of magnitude. First Gunlog, then the Crimson Terror, and then the Sovereigns, 3 ghouls, Aster, Song, and Veil. Just as he was trying to cope with that idea, another frightening realization appeared in Sunny's mind. He shuddered. Recalling another thing that Nephis had said, he then mumbled quietly. He repeated Nephis's words under his breath, that no, she wouldn't be the first one to conquer the 4th nightmare. She would be the first one to conquer every nightmare. Back then, he had understood her as wishing to be the first one to beat the 4th nightmare as well as all the rest. But her words could have been interpreted in a different way. Among the awakened, there was a general agreement that the names of the ranks were not coincidental. Many people thought that the words used by the spell described the ascent toward godhood, or the descent into profanity as far as nightmare creatures were concerned. In many ways, these 2 paths were reflections of each other. A person of a 3rd rank was described as ascended, since they were rising above their human nature. A creature of the same rank was called fallen. This step had to do with ascension, or the opposite of it. A person of the fourth rank was described as transcendent, since they had transcended the mundane and assumed some qualities of the divine. A creature of the same rank was called corrupted. This step had to do with transformation. It was no coincidence that the aspect ability the saints received was called a transformation ability, after all. The next step also had a special meaning to it. It represented authority and reign. Be it supreme or great beings of that level were meant to consolidate their power and exert it upon the world. The fifth step of the class hierarchy was much the same, allowing nightmare creatures to create and control armies of lesser minions. Such creatures were called tyrants. What would a human who had reached the supreme rank be called, then? Sunny trembled. Nephis had not meant that she would not only be the first human to conquer the fourth nightmare, but also all the rest. She had meant that she would be first to conquer the fifth, the sixth, and the seventh, because the fourth nightmare had already been conquered.
Le Sovereign.
Kai of the Great Clan Song, Anvil of the Great Clan Valor, and a person called Asterion had conquered it, and Broken Sword of the Immortal Flame. Broken Sword had been mysteriously killed in the process. Aster, Song, and Vale had returned from the fourth nightmare wreathed in new authority, while Broken Sword perished. What was a domain? Possibly the expression of the fifth aspect ability they had received, a special one, just like the special transformation ability the saints possessed. And for some reason, they had chosen to keep their accomplishment a secret, instead exerting their influence on humanity from the shadows. Wasn't it strange that their names seemed to practically disappear from the pages of history after Broken Sword died? They too were the first to become saints after all, not if they had chosen to keep them hidden. Wasn't it strange that Castor of Han Li clan seemed so loyal to the mysterious sovereigns, who had ordered him to kill the last daughter of the Immortal Flame clan? Not if they were the real power behind the great legacy clans, to which his own lesser clan was beholden. Wasn't it hard to believe that there were words that could kill just by becoming known to a person? Not if those words were the names of the three supreme rulers that preferred to remain nameless. Sunny moaned slightly, then covered his face his hands. He cursed under his breath, thinking that it was crap, and wondering why he had to go and get himself involved in all this crap. He had a feeling that his life had just become much more complicated. Sunny spent some time staring at the pile of books in front of him with a dark expression. After a while, he sighed heavily. So, there were hidden forces out there that exerted influence over the entire human race. The authority was as invisible as it was frightening, and now he knew their names. The sovereigns were at least as powerful as the government, or maybe even more so. The exact relationship between these two hegemonic powers, one official, the other secretive, was not clear. But for now, knowing the full extent of the authority resting in the hands of the sovereigns was not that important. However, it was important to know that the world was not at all as he had imagined. It was much more dangerous. Why? Because if there was one thing that all wielders of authority shared, it was the animosity toward others encroaching on their power. That was just human nature. Among the strong, only one entity could be the strongest, and so that entity was always apprehensive of others growing stronger. Bosses of criminal gangs in the outskirts were always paranoid of their lieutenants usurping them, and tended to violently get rid of those who were too successful. In the Dark City, Gunlog reigned with an iron fist, destroying anyone who dared to be strong without submitting to his rule, and sovereigns would be much the same. Since Sunny was already powerful beyond reason for a person of his age at least, and had an even more frightening potential, the sovereigns would never allow him to exist outside their control. Luckily, they did not know the true extent of his strength yet, but since his main goal was to become stronger, as strong as he possibly could, as fast as he possibly could, to not fall behind Nephis, that was going to be a problem. Suddenly, some things about the awakened society became more clear. A long time ago, Sunny had learned that Masterjet had no chance of ever becoming a saint. Apparently, One had to have a team of outstanding companions and a lot of support to attempt conquering the third nightmare, and she lacked both due to her problematic personality. Would sovereigns allow someone outside their grasp to become a saint? Most resources and knowledge about the dream realm belonged to the legacy clans, especially when it came to anything having to do with higher ranks, and the clans were controlled by the sovereigns, which basically meant that they could prevent anyone from becoming a saint simply by refusing their support. How many talented masters like Jet were being suppressed from growing more powerful because they didn't serve one of the supremes? There were a couple of saints serving the government, at least. Whom were they really loyal to? He muttered bitterly that he hated it so much. Of course, Sunny knew that all of this was just his conjecture. And yet, one thing was certain. The choice presented to him by Master Jet was not as straightforward as he had thought. In truth, he wasn't deciding between the great clans, the lesser clans, the government, and independence. He was deciding between entering into the service to the sovereigns or refusing it. And that choice was strained even further by his connection to Changing Star. He cursed under his breath, thinking, damnation. With a sigh, Sunny stared at the bookshelves surrounding him and then stood up. He had to get a few more books to read. Many hours later, he tiredly put the last one away and rubbed his face. Now that he had absorbed a lot of knowledge about the current geography and situation of the dream realm, a seed of a plan began to form in his mind. However, he still needed more information. He wouldn't be able to find it here, however. For that, he would have to visit an old acquaintance. One thing he did find, nevertheless, was a bit more information about the sovereigns. Asterion Kai Song. An anvil of valor. The last one was possibly the most renowned. An heir of the great clan, he was mentioned many times in the texts describing the human expansion into the northern territories of the dream realm, as well as the history of Bastion, one of the 3 central human citadels in the dream realm. In fact, he had apparently been responsible for slaying the Titan whose remains were then used to create the chair Sunny was currently sitting on. He thought to himself, simply strong. Later, though, the traces of Saint Anvil disappeared. There was no mention of his death, but the reins of clan valor were now in the hands of his cousins, at least officially. Kai Song was only slightly less famous. Unlike Anvil of Vale, she had come from one of the lesser legacy clans, and it was by her hand that it was elevated to the status of a great one. The stronghold of Clan Song Ravenheart was the second major human settlement in the dream realm. Its sphere of influence was separated from the other 2 territories by especially dreadful regions. The border with the Valor clan was especially deadly, but also rather thin. From what Sunny was able to learn, Kai Song was still the ruler of her clan, although she rarely appeared in public. She was known as a benevolent and charitable person, but that was pretty much all the information he could find. It seemed that it was her adoptive daughters who mostly acted on her behalf. Seishin was one of them, although she was trapped on the Forgotten Shore for too long to be mentioned anywhere. And lastly, there was a man named Asterion. He was the most mysterious of the 3. No one seemed to know where he came from and where he went after the Broken Swords cohort was disbanded. In fact, there was barely any mention of him at all. Asterion was not connected to the 3rd Great Legacy clan, at least from the looks of it, or any lesser clan for that matter. Sunny couldn't even find out when and where he had been born, let alone if he was still alive. Even in the texts describing the deeds of Broken Sword and his companions, the name Asterion was only mentioned in passing, as though he had never made any important contributions. Sunny shook his head and scowled.
Let me guess, he's the most terrifying of the 3.
That was an easy conclusion to make because it took one to know one. Sunny himself was barely mentioned and tended to hide his contributions. He groaned that his head hurt. The worst part was that this was only half of all the research he had to do. He had learned enough about the human position in the dream realm and the sovereigns. Now, he had to learn as much as he could about the gods, the demons, and the unknown. It was time to pay Teacher Julius a visit. Of course. Sunny couldn't visit his old instructor with empty hands. Pushing the books aside, he activated the terminal embedded into the table, lingered for a few moments, and then typed.
All of the Forgotten Shore is separated into 3 parts, one of which
It took Sunny the rest of the night to compile all of the information he had gathered about the Forgotten Shore into a succinct, comprehensive report. Knowing how passionate teacher Julius was about researching the dream realm, Sunny tried not to miss any important detail. He had described the geography and environment of the region to the best of his ability, including all the notable landmarks he visited or heard about, as well as the peculiar nature of the Dark Sea and the Labyrinth. He also described most of the nightmare creatures he had seen, met, or fought, writing down everything he knew about their powers, behavior, and weaknesses, writing through the lens of his own experience where he could. When possible, he included the information received directly from the spell, complete with the descriptions of memories and echoes he knew about. Of course, he provided those texts both in the human tongue and in the runic language. Lastly, he had written down the results of his exploration and studies into the history of the Forgotten Shore, describing in detail every engraving, every mosaic, and every mural he had seen. He also added his theories about what had happened to the ancient civilization, as well as his observations on how the ancient people of the Forgotten Shore had lived before the fall. Of course, there were things that he had kept to himself. Sunny omitted anything having to do with the nest of the vile, thieving bird, the Weaver, and the underground chamber beneath the ruined cathedral. He did not mention the stone saint, firstly because he wanted to keep her existence a secret, and secondly because she was connected to the unknown. He also avoided mentioning his battle against the coral golems and the banishment of the cursed sea, as well as the eventual fate of the Crimson Terror and the destruction of both the artificial sun and the spire itself. As far as everyone was concerned, Sunny had left through the gateway with the rest of the dreamers. No one had paid attention to his whereabouts in those last minutes, and he wanted to keep it that way. Well, no one except for Effie and Cassie, but he was reasonably sure that they would be discreet about certain things. And even if they failed to keep their lips sealed, Sunny had ways to explain his actions without revealing the truth. Finishing the report, Sunny leaned tiredly on the back of his chair and glanced at the screen. There, a long title was shown: Exploration Report on the Forgotten Shore by Awakened Sunless. He thought to himself that it was good enough. Sunny had no idea how to write an academic paper, or a proper field report for that matter, so he had written and structured this document in a way that would have been the most helpful for his younger self a year ago when he had entered the Forgotten Shore without knowing anything about it. A manual such as this would have made so many things easier. With a sigh, Sunny sent the report to his communicator, then turned off the terminal and stood up. Stretching his tired body, he swayed a little and yawned. It was already 2 days since his return to the real world, so the fatigue was slowly accumulating. Soon, he would have to start using the stimulants provided to him by Masterjet. But that moment had not come yet. Sunny walked away from the table, then hesitated a little and came back, picking up several books from the orderly pile. He returned them to the proper shelves. After every book was back to its intended place, he nodded with satisfaction and finally left the library. He mused that it was a fascinating place and that he liked it there. Looking back at the unassuming building, Sunny breathed in the cold winter air and remembered the description of Weaver's mask. Weaver believed that knowledge was the origin of power, and so always hid behind numerous lies. What would the demon of fate think about this place? It was, after all, a palace of knowledge. Sunny remembered the deceptive pages that presented a washed, polished version of history and smiled.
Yeah, but it is also a palace of lies.
It was weird returning to the sleeper compound. The low, fortified building was much like he remembered, only weighed down by more snow. Sunny had not spent a lot of time here, but those days before the winter solstice were some of the most memorable in his life. So much excitement, so much dread. Who knew that he would not see it again for more than a year? Entering the familiar hall, he looked around, half expecting to see a crowd of nervous sleepers. But of course, there was no one around. Everyone had already left for their first venture into the dream realm, and it was too early for the next year's dreamers to arrive. Walking through the empty halls, he found his way to the lower levels of the compound and approached the wilderness survival classroom, which also served as teacher Julius' office. Opening the door, He saw the spacious and tastefully decorated room where he had spent most of his short stay at the academy. Suddenly, Sunny was overwhelmed by a wave of nostalgia. He scolded himself, thinking that he was too young to be nostalgic about the good old days. His mentor was not at his usual place, sitting behind the wide wooden desk. Instead, the old man was standing in front of a glass case, studying the skull of a ferocious creature stored inside and taking notes. He hadn't changed at all. Teacher Julius was still old, with messy gray hair, absent-minded eyes, and a pair of bushy eyebrows that seemed to have a life of their own. His posture and expression were full of quiet melancholy. However, as soon as he heard someone entering the classroom, his face changed, becoming lively and curious once again. Turning around, the old man stared at the visitor with confusion. Then his face suddenly lit up with a bright, infectious smile.
Sunny, my boy!
Teacher Julius was just the same, but Sunny's perception of him had changed. Not only because of how instrumental the things he had learned from the old instructor turned out to be for his survival, but also because of the history books he had just read. He wondered to himself how old Teacher Julius was, anyway. Sunny had never thought about it, but after learning more about immortal flame and the first generation of the awakened, he couldn't help but see his mentor in a new light. Teacher Julius must have been, if not of the same age as those legendary figures, then at least of the same generation. Those people had lived through much darker, much more violent times. They had survived the end of the world and built a new one from the ruins.
Sunny, my boy!
Before Sunny could react properly, he was subjected to a passionate hug. Then, Teacher Julius unceremoniously pushed him to the nearest chair.
Finally, you're back. I never doubted that you would return, not even for a moment. No student of mine would allow himself to die easily. You know. Wait, what am I talking about? Of course, you know. You're one of my students yourself, after all.
Sunny couldn't help but smile while listening to the excitement in the old man's voice. Before coming here, he was slightly worried that Teacher Julius would not even remember him. Despite the fact that his course was not the most popular at the academy, the eccentric instructor must have mentored thousands of sleepers throughout his career. What was one more? But luckily, Sunny had been wrong.
But my boy, a whole year! Did you like it in the dream realm so much that you didn't want to return? Did you not think that your old teacher would be worried sick? In the name of the gods, what happened?
Sunny hesitated a little, then said apologetically,
Well, Teacher Julius, you see, I ended up in an unexplored region of the dream realm, and the only gateway there was guarded by a fallen terror.
The old man blinked.
Heavens, how horrible! So what did you do?
Sunny shrugged.
Well, in short, I met two beautiful girls, escorted them to an ancient castle, spent a few months exploring a cursed city, went on a long and arduous quest to find a magic crown, killed a devil, helped a princess become a queen, participated in a war or two, climbed an evil tower, and finally ended up near the gateway. Basically, I survived, just how you taught me to.
Teacher Julius listened to him very carefully, then nodded a few times.
Great, you did great. Just as expected from one of my students. But Sunny...
The old man's eyes suddenly shone brightly, full of excitement.
Did you say something about an unexplored region?
Sunny smiled, then activated his communicator.
I did, in fact, I have compiled a lengthy report about things I have seen, fought, and discovered there. Would you like to take a look? I can send it to you.
Teacher Julius looked down with embarrassment.
A report? Oh, you shouldn't have. You must be so terribly busy right now.
However, even while he was saying that, the old man was already opening the file. As soon as he started reading, his eyes widened, and a delighted smile appeared on his face.
Brilliant. This is brilliant. Wait, what's that? You even remembered to include citations in the original runic. That's my boy, marvelous. Well-preserved ruins, a whole city. There is. Oh my.
It took teacher Julius some time to skim through the report. Throughout the whole process, he continued to mumble under his nose in an increasingly excited tone. Some remarks Sunny understand, while some went completely over his head, like Greystone architecture, possible connections to the third wandering archon, or which era of the Babel script would that correspond to, or rats. That'll show that smug bastard Sando how wrong his universal origin of rituals ramblings were. The old man's eyes gradually grew wider and wider. Finally, he deactivated his communicator and looked at Sunny with an expression of profound exhilaration.
You've done exceptionally well, Sunny. Of course, your report is rough around the edges and needs a lot of work to be published. But this is going to make so many people happy. I can name at least a dozen theories that can be expanded, confirmed, or refuted thanks to all the new data you provided. And that's just off the top of my head. Not to mention all the good that will come from the detailed descriptions of so many new types of nightmare creatures you included.
Teacher Julius smiled proudly.
You truly have a heart of an explorer, my boy. Very few people do, and out of those, even less have a keen mind such as yours. Not to mention the ability to venture into the deadly expanse of the dream realm and not only come back alive, but also remember to look at more than just what's in front of them. But it is thanks to such people that we can deepen out knowledge of the spell.
He sighed.
Most of the awakened only know how to hack and slash. They tend to look at us with very little regard, but it is only because of us that they know how to hack and where to slash. Luckily, there are few bright minds here and there.
Sunny stared at his mentor with a bit of surprise. He had not expected such an intense reaction. He just wrote down his findings about the Forgotten Shore to please the old man, considering they shared a hobby.
And I'm sorry, published. What do you mean by that exactly?
Teacher Julius glanced at him with a humorous spark in his eyes.
Oh, don't worry. This old man is not going to rob his own student of the reward. I'll help you bring this paper to a proper state free of charge. I don't even need to be put down as a Kother, although it would make me happy if you did. What do I need money for? I have more money than I could ever spend already.
Sunny tilted his head, then blinked a couple of times. His heart was suddenly grasped by burning emotions.
Excuse me, Teacher Julius, but did you say something about money?
The old man stared at him with confusion.
Yes, I did. Isn't it why you have compiled this marvelous report? To receive the contribution points from the government?
Sunny lingered for a bit, then slowly shook his head.
No, I just thought you would like to read it. I don't even know what these contribution points you mentioned are.
Teacher Julius looked at him for a while, then burst out laughing.
Oh my, what a good student I have. Ah, you really delighted me today, Sunny. Such pure dedication to the noble calling of an explorer. I wish more people were as selfless as you.
Sunny thought to himself in alarm, selfless. What did he mean, selfless? There was not a single selfless bone in his body. Was there really money to be made from his stupid report? The old man shook his head and said,
The government rewards those who enrich the base of knowledge we have about the spell of the dream realm and the nightmare creatures quite generously. The more rare and more vital the information you submit is, the more contribution points you receive. These points can then be exchanged for a variety of useful things or simply turned into credits. Considering that no one has ever explored the Forgotten Shore before and how comprehensive your report is, I'd say you'll receive a pretty sizable sum. You really didn't know this?
Sunny slowly shook his head.
How sizable are we talking? Like if I want to rent an apartment, no, a house. If I want to rent a house in an area of the city with clean air, how many weeks would this reward buy?
Teacher Julius gave him a strange look.
Rent a house? What a strange example. Sunny, with how unique the data you contributed is, you don't need to rent a house. Wouldn't it be easier to just buy one? Sunny?
Sunny couldn't respond immediately, though. He was in the process of falling out of his chair. After a while, he regained enough composure to continue the conversation. Sunny and teacher Julius chatted for a while, discussing the exact process of publishing the report, what changes would have to be made, and how they would work together to bring the project to fruition. All of it, of course, was going to happen only after Sunny had settled in the dream realm and found a citadel to anchor himself to. Right now, he did not exactly have time to work on an academic paper. Teacher Julius also shared some of his knowledge about the human settlements in the dream realm and his views on how to decide on a proper citadel. All his advice, however, could be described in one sentence.
Find one with good plumbing.
Sunny wasn't sure what to make of it, but judging by the pained expression on the old man's face, it was indeed an important factor. Finally, he managed to turn the conversation toward the things he really wanted to learn about.
Speaking of that, I am really unclear on one thing. While exploring the Dark City, I found a few places of worship. However, the deities they worshipped seemed to be different from the ones I heard about in my first nightmare. Did the native humans of the dream realm all have different gods?
Teacher Julius looked at him and smiled.
Ah, the gods. That is an interesting subject indeed.
He thought for a few moments, then said,
Yes and no. The gods worshipped in different regions had different names, but from what we can tell, those names all described the same entities. The current consensus is that the gods of the dream realm were, in fact, actual beings, perhaps creatures of the divine rank.
Sunny nodded.
Really, thens, where are they now?
The old man sighed.
That is the strange thing about the gods. They are dead, just like everything else in the dream realm is dead. They seem to have been alive in the time periods of many of the nightmares, but the ruins we have encountered and explored mostly describe them as being destroyed. By what or whom, we do not know. We also don't know if they existed before or after the nightmare spell itself appeared.
He lingered for a bit, then added,
But we do know a few things about the gods. For example, how many of them there were.
Sunny smiled.
Let me guess, 7.
Teacher Julius chuckled.
You would think that right, but no, there were only 6 gods. Their most common names were Sun, War, Beast, Storm, Heart, and Shadow. Although those names don't do them justice, truth be told.
Sunny raised an eyebrow.
Really, how so?
His mentor rubbed his chin, then said doubtfully,
Well, a god is too vast of a being to be described with one word. Take the goddess of war. Oh, yes, their gender seems to be very mercurial. The war god is supposed to be the deity of warfare, and in a sense he, or she, is, but he is also the god of life.
Sunny stared at him and blurted out a bewildered question, wondering how that made any sense. The old man smiled.
War is synonymous with struggle, and what is life if not a constant struggle for survival? So the goddess of war can also be called the goddess of life. She is also the goddess of progress, technology, craft, intellect, and through all of this, the patron goddess of humanity.
Teacher Julius got engrossed in his favorite field and went on a small tangent.
Or take the beast god. He is also often described as the goddess of the moon, as well as hunting, carnal desire, blood, beauty, and the cycle of birth and death. The sun god is also the lord of light, a manifestation of fire, passion, creation, and destruction. The storm god is also the god of the depths, of the oceans, of darkness, stars, travel, guidance, and disaster, and so on.
Sunny coughed.
And what about Shadow God?
The eccentric instructor shrugged.
I'm not too familiar with that one. As far as gods go, Shadow is not very prominent. Well, as a shadow should be, I guess. He is sometimes called the god of peace, death, solace, and mysteries. That's about it, I think.
Sunny hesitated for a few moments, then asked carefully,
I see. Hard to imagine that only 6 entities were responsible for all that. Were there perhaps any other divine beings?
Teacher Julius thought for a few moments, then shrugged.
There certainly were many beings that were either partially divine or even almost as powerful as the gods themselves. We don't know much about them, though. Take demons, for example.
Sunny held his breath.
Demons were such mysterious creatures. They were described as having power almost equal to that of the gods, but of a different nature. They also seem to have created themselves, or at least appeared out of nowhere. Almost nothing is known about them, except for the fact that there were 7 of them, one more terrible than the other.
He raised an eyebrow.
Terribles, why were they terrible?
The old man smiled.
What can be more terrifying than a creature that came out of nowhere, wielding enough power to wage war against the heavens? Don't forget that what humans fear the most is the unknown. Perhaps the gods were much the same.
Sunny hesitated for a long time, then finally asked,
Teacher Julius, have you ever heard about the unknown?
His mentor gave him a weird look, then laughed.
What kind of a question is that? Haven't I dedicated my whole life to exploring the unknown? I think the lack of sleep is getting to you, my boy. Come, I have wasted enough of your time. A newly awakened like you should be running around, trying to find patronage or ingratiate themselves to a welcoming clan. I'll recommend you several books on the gods and divinity to read once you have settled out there in the dream realm.
Sunny smiled weakly, realizing that Teacher Julius did not know anything about the Weaver, the reasons for why the gods were dead, and the unknown. Strangely, he felt relieved. Leaving the sleeper compound, Sunny felt as though even the winter cold could not keep him from feeling sleepy anymore. Wondering what time it was, he looked up out of habit and glanced at the sun. The sun was all wrong. Suddenly, Sunny was wide awake, his hand instinctively outstretched to summon the midnight shard. It took him a few moments to recognize his error. He muttered to himself with relief that the sun was normal. It was just not the same as on the forgotten shore. He also didn't have to measure time by observing the sky anymore. He had a communicator that could show him what time of day it was, up to the exact nanosecond. Shaking his head, Sunny headed back toward the hospital complex. He was late for a memorial of sorts. The survivors of the Dreamer Army were supposed to gather today to celebrate those who remained alive and remember those who had fallen. Entering the medical center, he headed toward the conference hall, but then lingered for a moment in front of a monitor attached to the wall. There, 100 names were shown listing everyone who had made it back, and on the very top of it, there were 3 very special ones. Raised by Wolves, Nightingale, Song of the Fallen, Effie, Kai, and Cassie. Sunny stared at the 3 true names for some time, then slowly lowered his gaze. Right beneath was his own name. With a grim expression on his face, Sunny opened the doors and entered the hall. The former sleepers of the Forgotten Shore were all there, at least those who had awoken at the academy or could make it there for the memorial. He looked around the crowd, searching for familiar faces. It was strange to see all these people back in the real world, especially without Nephi's. Now that they were out of danger and had lost their leader, there wasn't a lot to keep them together, and so much to split them apart. Before, they were united by necessity and the irresistible will of Changing Star. Now, nothing remained to prevent the old grievances from pulling them apart. And yet, the 100 survivors seemed strangely united. Perhaps it was the shared trauma of their harrowing experience in the dream realm, or something else that Sunny couldn't quite understand, but there was no division between them. On the contrary, every awakened gathered in the hall seemed to share an invisible bond with all the others. He thought to himself, simply weird. Many people welcomed his arrival with warm greetings. Sunny smiled awkwardly and did his best to reciprocate their goodwill. After a few such encounters, he finally noticed Kai at the back of the crowd. Sunny stumbled and stared at his friend for a couple of seconds. He muttered, "I'll be damned. How could that guy become even more gorgeous?" The awakening made Kai's slender figure even more graceful. his perfect face even more handsome, and his electric green eyes even more mesmerizing. His luscious dark auburn hair was now neatly cut and styled, his clothes were simple and exquisitely fashionable, and the several pieces of jewelry he wore somehow managed to enhance every one of those features by bringing it just the right amount of attention. He thought to himself, resentfully, that it was such injustice. With a resentful sigh, Sunny made his way through the crowd and approached his friend. Kai noticed him from afar, and then the conference hall suddenly seemed to become much brighter due to his brilliant smile.
Sunny, you are finally there.
Sunny wanted to answer, but then froze for a second, noticing a stranger next to the charming young man. A sickly, terribly gaunt young woman was sitting in a wheelchair, staring at them with a tired expression. There was clearly something defective about her body. She was unhealthily thin, with pale skin stretching over brittle bones and a strange twist to her spine. Her legs seemed lifeless and weak, tucked awkwardly on the step of her wheelchair. Her neck was clearly struggling to support the weight of her head. It was only when the young woman smiled mischievously did he finally recognize her.
What's the matter, doofus? You've been struck dumb by my beauty.
With a giggle, Effie spun her wheelchair, as though giving him the chance to take a good look.
Effie, that's Effie.
Sunny stared at her for a couple of moments, trying to connect the image of the mighty huntress he knew, tall, strong, beautiful, and full of vigor, to this weak, gaunt young woman. He only spoke when the pain of the flaw pierced his mind.
Not really. What the hell happened to you?
Effie smiled and shrugged.
Nothing. That's how I've always been in the real world.
Something moved in Sunny's memory. He remembered how the two of them sat on the support beam of the ruined cathedral, talking in whispers. He recalled Effie saying that for some of them, the real world was more of a hell than the dream realm. That was what Effie had said back then. Noticing the strange expression on his face, she grinned.
Don't worry about it. At least now that I'm awakened, I can move my hands. Look at this.
She grabbed the handles of the wheels, then balanced her chair at an angle and spun it around again.
See? Ain't that the coolest thing you've ever seen?
Sunny hesitated for a bit, then said quietly,
And yes, one of the coolest by far.
Effie gave him a smile, then glanced at Kai.
See, Knight? Your celebrity aura got nothing on my burning charisma.
The young man looked at her, but didn't say anything. Instead, he suddenly took a step forward and gave Sunny a big hug.
Sunny, thank God you're alive.
Sunny squirmed a little, but then surrendered to being embraced. With a resigned expression, he endured for as long as he could and then said through gritted teeth,
Why shouldn't I be alive, fool? I wasn't the one who's unconscious. Lanky body had to be dragged all the way to the gateway.
Kai squeezed him even tighter, then finally released his hold on him. Taking a step back, the charming young man hesitated for a couple of seconds and sighed.
Still, with your luck, I am surprised that the whole spire didn't just fall on your head.
Sunny froze, then forced out a smile.
Yeah, that would have been terrible, wouldn't it?
Soon, several instructors appeared. In a solemn and sonorous atmosphere, each of them gave a small speech congratulating the survivors of the Dreamer Army on overcoming the immeasurable hardships and returning to the real world alive. They also spoke about those who had fallen and offered words of solace, saying that their sacrifice would not be forgotten by mankind. After all, mankind only continued to exist because of young men and women like them. To Sunny, those words rang hollow and empty, but they affected many people in the crowd. He saw a few people crying, the others trying to keep a brave face. Everyone had lost a friend, a companion, or a loved one during the tumultuous last days on the forgotten shore. Finally, Instructor Rock took the stage and spoke in length about the meaning of being an awakened, their duty to safeguard humanity, and what they should do and expect in the next few days. However, at some point, he was interrupted. Someone in the crowd called out, demanding to know what had happened to Lady Nephi's. A hum of voices rose above the crowd, everyone joining in that plea. Instructor Rock sighed.
Calm down, awakened. I'll tell you everything we know.
The survivors of the Dreamer army grew silent, staring at him with piercing intensity. The mighty man hesitated for a few seconds, then said,
As all of you know by now, the gateway of the Forgotten Shore seemed to have been destroyed. Changing Star, who took it upon herself to distract the fallen terror to allow her people to escape, did not make it through in time.
A heavy, tortured tension hung in the air. The young men and women gathered in the hall kept silent, but their faces betrayed the storm of painful emotions raging in their hearts. Instructor Rock continued.
However, she's still alive out there in the dream realm. Her vital signs and brain activity readings are all stable. It seems that Lady Nephai's managed to escape the terror, at least.
He didn't need to say the rest. Everyone understood what it meant. She was trapped in the dream realm with no way to come back. Sunny glanced at the newly awakened around him, wondering what their reaction would be. Guilt, sorrow, fury. However, he was surprised by what he saw. A few moments later, a voice resounded from the crowd full of adamant belief, declaring that she would return, that if anyone could do it, it was Lady Nephai's. A wave of voices then joined that first one, all expressing their agreement. Someone insisted that she was Changing Star of the immortal flame and that she wouldn't die. Another voice bet that Lady Nephai's was currently roasting the terror's meat. Looking at a map and thinking about where to find another gateway, more voices chimed in, declaring that the immortal flame could not be extinguished. There was no guilt, sorrow, or fury, only hope, only faith. Uncomfortable, Sunny turned to Effie and Kai. Both seemed to be a little bit sad but strangely calm.
What do you guys think?
Effie hesitated for a few seconds, then shrugged.
I sort of agree. If anyone can make it out alive from there, it's Princess. It sounds impossible, but, I mean, it's her. You know how she is.
Kai remained silent for a bit, then nodded.
That's what I believe too, or at least try to believe.
Saying those words, he looked around with concern and said,
But Cassie must be devastated. Have you seen her?
Sunny stared at him grimly, then turned away. Sunny said, I did earlier. She is. Strangely, today the blind girl was nowhere to be found. To his relief, Kai sighed, then rubbed his face. Kai let out a tired breath and said he really wanted to sleep, that it was tough staying awake for that long, and asked what about them. Sunny shrugged. Sunny replied, I'm fine for now. I also have a pack of military-grade stimulants to keep me awake for a few more days. Effie glanced at them and grinned. Effie said, I am not sleepy at all. However, to be honest, I am dying from hunger. There has to be food here somewhere, right? Sometime later, they were in the cafeteria of the hospital complex. Sunny and Kai were already done with their dinner and observed with dark fascination as Effie was finishing her fourth serving. There was a small mountain of empty plates in front of her. Finally, the huntress was done with the food and leaned back tiredly in her wheelchair, full of satisfaction. Effie let out a satisfied sigh and told Sunny to go bring her something to drink. He stared at her with a dark expression and asked,
I already brought you the last 3 trays. Why don't you ask Kai?
Effie grinned.
Aren't you the youngest? Respect your elders, brat. Also, Kai and I are big shots now, way out of your league. Why would I ask a valiant true name awakened to serve me food when there's a nameless gremlin like you loitering around?
Sunny gritted his teeth, then obediently stood up and went to bring the young woman a few drinks. When he returned, Kai looked at him apologetically.
Sorry about that, Sunny. Actually, I am really surprised that you didn't receive a true name as well. No one deserves it more than you, in my opinion. Really.
Sunny shifted uncomfortably and said,
Yeah, Wells, you're not wrong. I do deserve a true name, don't I? What a travesty.
Effie giggled.
Hey, Knight, what do you think Sunny's true name would be?
Kai blinked a couple of times, though for a bit, then said with a smile,
I'm not sure, something like famous last words.
He chuckled lightly and then added,
Or no, really, that happened. What about you, Effie? What do you think?
Effie glanced at Sunny, then smiled with mischief.
It looks good in a dress.
He stared at her with murder in his eyes. Sunny snapped, Hey. While the gaunt young woman was laughing, Sunny turned to Kai and frowned.
Speaking of true names, Effie I can understand, but Nightingale, you were really named just like your band. What's up with that?
Then he looked at the charming archer with suspicion and said in a grave tone,
Kai, tell me honestly, the spell is also one of your fangirls, right?
His friend choked on his drink, then wiped his face awkwardly and gave Sunny a reproachful look. Finally, he looked down and sighed.
If it is, then not in a good way. At best, it's assassin.
Sunny smiled and leaned back on his chair, then looked at his friends with curiosity. There was a question he really wanted to ask, but tried not to up until now.
And what's your second ability, anyway?
His words hung in the air for a few moments. Suddenly, Kai coughed with embarrassment and looked away. After a couple of seconds, he said in a strange tone,
I can see really far now when I want to, even when there's no light. I am also supposed to be able to see through illusions and all forms of obfuscation, whatever that means, and I can also see through objects.
Sunny and Effie stared at him and asked almost simultaneously whether he meant through walls and through clothes. Kai hid behind his glass, lingered for a bit, and then answered in a small voice.
Yes, but I would never.
While Sunny tried to imagine why would Kai refuse to look through walls, Effie laughed out loud.
I see. What a great ability.
She shook her head, then turned to Sunny and asked,
Hey, doofus, I bet you often wanted to stab me with something sharp. Wanna try?
He frowned in confusion, then raised an eyebrow.
No, why would I stab you?
Effie looked at him with expectation clearly written on her face, then sighed in disappointment when he didn't move.
Ah, that's a shame. I wanted to demonstrate my second ability to you. Basically, it makes my whole body invulnerable. Well, comparatively, of course. Skin of steel, that sort of deal. A very sweet comprehensive defense boost, if I do say so myself.
Sunny blinked and looked at the gaunt young woman with a bit of awe. Indeed, that was a very powerful ability. Combined with Effie's previous one, it turned her into an exceedingly formidable presence on the battlefield, as though she had not been a real menace already. Effie glanced at him and asked curiously,
Well, what about you?
He shifted slightly.
A very neat type of conditional short-distance teleportation. Kai can see through walls, I can go through walls, while you can just plow through them, I guess, in your usual barbarous fashion.
Effie grinned.
Plowing, huh? Interesting choice of words. I wonder if...
Sunny hurriedly changed the subject.
So, what are your plans, guys? What citadels are you going to?
His sudden question changed the mood of the conversation. For a while, a strange silence settled among them. All three had contemplative, wistful expressions on their faces. This situation was inevitable, really, but they tried to avoid the discussion for as long as possible, mostly because it was both slightly awkward and slightly sad. Back on the Forgotten Shore, the three of them had forged a bond, and now, depending on their choices, that bond would most likely either weaken or break. The future was going to lead each on their own path, perhaps in opposite directions. For better or worse, they were about to go their separate ways. Perhaps fate would bring them together again, one day, or perhaps not. After a while, Effie sighed.
I don't know, really. I have received invitations from both Clan Valor and Clan Song, but, you know me, I don't do well with authority. Plus, none of them have moved a finger to help me when I really needed it. Only now that I am a hot commodity are they all suddenly kind and friendly. Rubs me the wrong way, to be honest.
She looked at her wheelchair, then slumped in it tiredly.
Anyway, I might take them up on the offer, or I might not. It depends on what the fastest way to get ready for the second nightmare would be. Maybe I'll have a better chance of becoming a master soon if I stay independent and don't have to compete against the actual heirs for resources and attention.
After the second nightmare, one's spiritual body became their physical body. Reaching the rank of a master would free Effie from her terrible disability, so Sunny understood her motivation perfectly. Now he knew why she had said that for her. Striving to conquer the second nightmare was the only way. Funnily enough, through no wish of his own, Sunny had ended up in a similar situation. Kai remained silent for a few moments. Then he too sighed.
As for me, my agency has secured me a very good position in Bastion, so I'll be going there soon. I won't have to fight another nightmare creature for a long, long time. I guess, maybe even never.
For someone who was speaking about being safe and comfortable for the rest of his life, he didn't sound too happy. There was a note of reluctance in his voice. Even shame. Sunny frowned.
You dropped that tone immediately, Kai. There's nothing wrong with living like a person should, not having to worry about being eaten every goddamn day. Don't even think about feeling bad about it. Got it?
The charming young man smiled sadly and nodded.
I do, please forgive my ungratefulness, but what about you, Sunny?
Sunny scratched the back of his head, then shrugged.
Well, I am rich now. You won't believe it, guys, but as it turns out, scribbling a few words about the things you see in the dream realm can actually earn you money. And I think I can weasel my way into receiving a salary from the academy as a research assistant, whatever that means. So, actually I haven't decided on a particular citadel yet, but I can pick pretty much any of them since the government is being very friendly.
Both Effie and Kai stared at him with incredulous expressions, clearly trying to imagine Sunny as an academic or even an instructor. Then both shook their heads simultaneously, saying they couldn't imagine it, that it sounded wrong. The conversation shifted back to the citadels, and someone asked which one he was going to choose. He thought for a bit, then shrugged.
Don't know yet, but I can tell you a secret, something that very few people know or think about. A very wise man told me to base my choice on it.
Sunny lingered for a moment, then said seriously,
Plumbing, the secret to a happy life is to find a citadel with great plumbing.
Soon it was time to say goodbye. Their parting was both warm and bittersweet. After seeing Kai and Effie off, Sunny lingered outside for a bit, and then returned to his room on one of the underground levels of the hospital complex. It was already evening, and his eyes were full of sand. With an irritated snarl, Sunny took one of the stimulant patches out of the pack and plastered it on his skin. Immediately, a cold fire flowed through his veins. His heart accelerated, and his mind cleared. Sunny felt refreshed, energized, and ready to chew on mountains. Of course, there was a price to pay for such a boost. It would be inevitably followed by a debilitating crash of the same magnitude, unless he used another stimulant, that is, and then another and another. Only with each new one, the duration of the effect would short, and the strain on his body would increase. If he was a mundane human, his heart would have probably exploded just from one of these unassuming patches. The government didn't joke around with its military tech, but he wasn't ready to make a decision just yet. He had to do a few more things, like finally checking on his new memory. Summoning the runes, he glanced at a particular cluster. Memories: Silver Bell, Puppeteer's Shroud, Midnight Shard, Ordinary Rock, Prowling Thorn, Endless Spring, Blood Blossom, Dark Wing, Moonlight Shard, Old Weaver's Mask, Broken Oath. The last one, Broken Oath, came from the twisted simulacrum of one of the 7 ancient heroes of the Forgotten Shore, the Lord. Even though the coral golem had turned out to be just an awakened monster, Sunny had high hopes for this memory. But before he concentrated on it, Sunny stared at the rest of his arsenal.
1, 2, 3.
12. After a year of constant battles and bloodshed, he only had 12 memories. Of course, he would have had much more if not for the need to feed Saint. The taciturn creature demanded a vast amount of resources to get her to the 200 shadow fragments, which was one of his goals. If not for that, he would have made a real windfall. Sunny already considered himself wealthy thanks to the contribution points teacher Julius was going to arrange for him. But if he had a dozen or two extra memories to sell, well, he would have been not just wealthy, but extravagantly so. Enough to buy several houses if he wished to. Maybe he still could sell some. Looking at his trusty weapons and tools, Sunny hesitated. Now that he could use Shadow Step to blink from one place to another, he didn't need to enhance his mobility that much. So Prowling Thorn and Dark Wing were potential candidates to be auctioned off. Maybe. They still had their uses, though. The rest he couldn't even imagine selling, at least not before finding better alternatives. Even the Silver Bell, which wasn't really all that useful, but had something of a sentimental value. The little bell was the first memory he had ever received, after all, and its description was sort of. It touched something in his heart.
Curses, I just used the stimulant. Why is my mind so scattered?
With a frown, Sunny finally concentrated on his new memory. Memory, broken oath. Memory rank, awakened. Memory tier I, memory type charm. His eyes widened slightly.
Jackpot.
Another charm, such luck. Excited, Sunny read further. Memory description. They made a terrible oath to destroy the curse or be consumed by it. Those who have broken the oath were consumed by the curse, and those consumed by the curse have broken their oath. In the end, none could escape their promise.
Morbid, I guess. I guess that's how the Carapace Legion was born.
He looked at the next string of runes. Memory enchantments, Oathbreaker. Enchantment description. The broken oath erodes souls of all those who approach it. Sunny held his breath for a few moments.
A soul attack.
Both the nightmare creatures and the awakened had many ways to destroy their enemies. Kinetic damage, called physical for simplicity, was the most common, but there were many others. Among them, soul damage was the rarest and hardest to defend against. It was no coincidence that Soul Reaper Jet, whose aspect allowed her to strike directly at the soul, was so feared. And now, Sunny had a soul attack of his own in the arsenal. There was one problem, however.
Weight erodes souls of all who come near. Will it affect me then as well?
A deep scowl appeared on his face. Sunny hesitated for a while, then sighed and summoned the memory into existence. Soon, a glistening gem made out of polished crimson coral appeared in his hand. A second later, he suddenly shuddered and groaned. As soon as the broken oath appeared, a sickening sensation permeated his entire being. It was as though someone was slowly draining the very life out of him. Not only that, but he also felt weaker. Looking down, Sunny saw his shadows ripple and react. The surly one stared at him with outrage and waved its hands in the air angrily, while the friendly one was hugging itself pitifully and pacing.
Damnation.
He had recognized the debilitating feeling that the gem produced. It was the same aura that had weakened him when he fought the coral golem. It was also the infinitely weaker version of the annihilating soul attack of the artificial sun. Gritting his teeth, Sunny dismissed the broken oath. Only when it disappeared completely could he breathe freely again.
Crap.
That was one serious side effect. How was he supposed to use his new charm if it would be slowly killing not only his enemies, but also Sunny himself? Drop it on the ground, use Shadow Step to blink away and hope for the best. Sunny sat quietly for a while thinking. Then, a tentative smile appeared on his face.
Wait, that should work right.
Turning away from the runes describing the soul-destroying gem, he concentrated on the description of his loyal shadow demon. Shadow, Marble Saint. Shadow rank, awakened. Shadow class, demon. Shadow attributes, battle master, stalwart, spark of divinity. Shadow abilities, weapon sage, underworld armament. Shadow fragments, 8200. Concentrating on the underworld armament ability, Sunny read. Shadow Saint's armor can accommodate a charm memory to inherit its enchantments. His smile widened.
Good, and that's the first part.
Looking a bit higher, he found another string of runes. Attribute stalwart. Attribute description. The stone saint is highly resistant to all forms of damage, as well as being fully immune to mind and soul attacks. Fully immune to mind and soul attacks.
Oh yes.
Sunny let out a satisfied sigh. The broken oath was pretty useless by itself, but when combined with Saint's special ability and attributes, it would make his shadow even more lethal. That was because Saint was a very special kind of demon, one whose will couldn't be intruded upon or shaken. Both her mind and her soul, well, the shadow that inhabited her body instead of a soul, were utterly indomitable. He only had to make sure to not be anywhere near the living statue while she had the crimson gem set into her armor. Tricky, but doable. And speaking of armor, he was not done exploring his memories yet. In fact, he had left the best for last. Looking at the shimmering runes, Sunny concentrated on a particular string, one that looked broken and incomplete. Memory old. Now that he was awakened, he could finally restore the broken onyx armor he had bought from Stev for a measly handful of soul shards, the ascended suit of armor of the 6th tier, the most powerful memory he owned, or seen even. Summoning the old, Sunny strained his muscles and with some effort managed to place it on the floor in front of him. Even now that he was an awakened, the weight of the stone memory was not something he could endure easily without using both of his shadows or wasting essence to enhance his strength. Breathing a bit heavily, Sunny studied the damaged memory. The suit of ancient plate armor was jet black in color. Its design was intricate and solemn, radiating a feeling of dark resolve and stalwart, adamantine grace. Its glossy surface seemed to absorb and devour any light that fell on it. All parts of the armor were perfectly fitted to one another, creating an almost seamless barrier of impenetrable steel. Well, not steel yet. Stone. The ancient armor looked extremely similar to the one stone saint had worn, and now that the shadow was a demon, they were even more alike. The onyx armor in front of Sunny was still more impressive, though more regal, as though created for a being of a higher status. And just like the armor worn by the saint, it would only transform from actual stone into the miraculous stone-like alloy if risen from its passive state. It couldn't be done yet, though, because its spellweave was damaged. To repair it, the self-restoring properties of the broken memory had to be activated by an infusion of essence, which no one back on the Forgotten Shore could do. Now, however, things were different. Now, Sunny was an awakened. Not only could he control the flow of shadow essence inside his body, he even had the soul serpent to help him guide it. Placing his hands on the cold surface of the onyx breastplate, Sunny closed his eyes and sent the essence into the onyx armor. The shadow essence flowed through the coils of the soul serpent into his left hand, then surged into the cold black onyx. There was no resistance that Sunny had to overcome to transfer it from his body into the stone armor. After all, the armor was his memory, and as such could be considered to be a part of his soul. The surge of energy rushed through the ancient armament, then returned to his body through his right hand. Soon, a stable cycle was established, with a constant current of shadow essence circulating through both Sunny himself and the onyx armor. It was a strange feeling, as though there was an ethereal river flowing through him, moving endlessly in a circle. Thanks to the shadow guide attribute of the soul serpent, its current was especially swift and powerful. Soon, the onyx armor became saturated by shadow essence. As Sunny watched, it slowly began to change. This was the fundamental trait of both Saint and her armaments, with which the memory shared a common origin. Both were made out of a strange living stone. When imbued with soul energy, the taciturn demon's body turned from stone to bizarre stone-like flesh, while her weapons turned to stone-like steel. Sunny knew this because he had seen the remains of both the original stone saint and her fellow stone warrior after they had been defeated by the monstrous iron spiders. After being destroyed, the living statues had turned back into inanimate stone. The memory was transforming right in front of his eyes. Soon, its glossy black surface felt different to the touch. Colder, lighter, more resilient, closer to metal than stone. The living armament had assumed its true form.
And now the most important part.
Sunny gazed through the dark metal and peered at the ethereal weave hiding beneath it. The pattern of the diamond string was much more complex and vast than any that he had ever seen, with the exception of the weaver's mask. But then, nothing could compare to that miraculous memory. There were 6 bright embers serving as anchors for the countless threads of light inside the onyx armor. However, the weave was damaged and chaotic. Thousands of strings were torn and disconnected from the rest of the pattern, breaking its flow and logic. Because of that, the armor couldn't repair itself before. It needed to be imbued with essence and turned from dead stone to enchanted metal for the self-repairing properties that all memories possess to come into effect. And now it was. With an expression of wonder on his face, Sunny observed as the spellweave started to repair itself. The diamond string moved against the invisible winds that had been playing with them before. The torn ends turned whole again. The separated threads became connected to the rest of the pattern once more. Thousands upon thousands of ethereal strings moved in unison, their motions full of strange symmetry and grace. Watching the beautiful weave restore itself filled Sunny with a deep feeling of satisfaction. He smiled. This feels right. He continued to pour essence into the ancient armor and watched as it slowly returned to its intended state. And then, it was finally whole once again. With a content sigh, Sunny removed his hands from the breastplate of the onyx armor and retrieved the shadow essence back into his body. After the memory turned back into stone, he dismissed it. After that, not wasting any time, Sunny dove into the soul sea, walked to stand between the 2 shadow cores, and summoned the memory down. As soon as the silhouette of the ancient armor appeared from the sphere of light, he glanced at the runes surrounding it.
Come on, be good, be great. I've waited for this moment for so long.
He read the first string of runes. Memory, mantle of the underworld.
Whoa, sounds awesome, but underworld, that word again.
One of Saint's abilities was called Underwalled Armament. Her own runes also described the creator of the living statues as residing in the cavernous halls of a dark domain, as well as being the last child of the unknown.
Was Saint made by the ruler of the underworld or something?
Sunny shivered slightly, then glanced at the intricate black armor with a solemn expression. Well, if her creator was indeed one of the 7 demons and a sibling to Weaver, the demon of fate, then ruling the underworld might not have been out of the question. Shaking his head, Sunny returned to reading the runes. Memory rank ascended. Memory tier 6. Memory type armor. Memory description, vowing to never look upon the gods of the black skies again. The prideful demon retreated into the darkness beneath an unassailable mountain chain. He wasn't the first to lead his army against the gods. However, he was the first to shed their blood, as well as learn the secrets of his own.
Lead an army against the gods.
When teacher Julius mentioned that demons had enough power to wage war against the heavens, Sunny had thought of it as a figure of speech. But maybe it was not. Perhaps a few of them had really tried. And what was that about the secrets of the blood?
Endless questions like always.
Shaking his head again, Sunny turned away from the description and continued to read. Memory enchantments, living stone feather of truth, stalwart, underworld armament, prince of the underworld. Sunny stared at the long list of enchantments for a while, his heart beating wildly in his chest.
Can't be.
Living stone attribute description. This armor can repair itself while being worn. Feather of truth attribute description. The weight of this armor can be changed at will. Stalwart attribute description. This armor provides extremely high protection against physical attacks, high protection against elemental attacks, and a moderate amount of protection against mind and soul attacks. Underworld armament attribute description. This armor can accommodate a charm memory to inherit and enhance its enchantments. Prince of the Underworld attribute description. This armor grows stronger according to the amount of opponents its wielder defeats. Vanquished foes, 1213-6000. Sunny remained silent for a while. His dark room, which was situated deep underground, was silent for a long time. After a while, he shifted slightly and said in a low voice,
"Well, I'll be damned."
Sunny sat in the darkness for a while thinking. At first, he wanted to immediately put on his new magnificent onyx armor, but then dismissed that idea. There would be time later. For now, he was too tired. The effects of the stimulant were slowly wearing off, and he had spent too much shadow essence already. He did, however, note a few things about the mantle of the underworld. The first fact he noticed was that it shared 2 enchantments with Saint. However, there were subtle but important differences between the versions of stalwart and underworld armament possessed by the onyx armor and the taciturn demon. The memory offered better protection against physical and elemental attacks, but lacked the complete immunity to mind and soul attacks, possessing a moderate amount of protection against those rare and fearsome types of damage instead. Overall, this was an advantageous trade-off, since most nightmare creatures relied on more common ways of destroying awakened. Unless they didn't. The more interesting difference, however, was hidden in the description of the underworld armament. While Saint's armor could accommodate a charm memory to inherit its enchantments, the mantle of the underworld could both inherit and enhance them. Just one word made for so much difference. Sunny couldn't wait to explore this subtle trait of his new memory. Living Stone and Feather of Truth, meanwhile, were pretty obvious. That didn't mean, however, that these enchantments did not have a lot to offer. He could already see many interesting ways to apply both in battle. The downside was that both were active enchantments, and as such, would require a constant flow of essence to function. What's worse, the armor couldn't even be used without activating the first one. But the most interesting enchantment was, without a doubt, Prince of the Underworld.
A growing memory.
Pondering about that strange and miraculous enchantment, Sunny couldn't help but think about the first lord of the Bright Castle, who had supposedly been the first master of the mantle of the underworld. What tier and rank was the onyx armor when he had first found it? How many of the vanquished foes had been defeated by his hand? Was the mantle of the underworld one of the reasons for his legendary achievements? For the longest time, Sunny had wondered about how an ascended memory of the 6th tier had ended up in the hands of humans in the Dark City. It had to have come from destroying a fallen terror, or so he had thought. Now, there were other possibilities, but all these questions were doomed to be left unanswered, sadly. The First Lord and his companions had taken the answers with them to the grave. Remembering the lonely cairn in the Hollow Mountains, Sunny sighed. Then, his thoughts wandered to something else.
The goddess of the black skies, Storm God.
Teacher Julius had described Storm God as being the deity of the depths, of the oceans of darkness, stars, travel, guidance, and disaster. He also said that the gender of the gods was subject to change. Stars, darkness, and storms were somewhat related to black skies. Frowning, Sunny remembered the runes describing the mantle of the underworld. Indeed, black skies could also be translated as skies covered by storm clouds or the night sky.
Interesting.
Translating the runes reminded him of something. Opening his communicator, Sunny found a note he made during his conversation with Effie and Kai. There, their true names were written down in runic language. Nightingale. Kai's true name was pretty simple to understand, but the spell chose to interpret it rather creatively. Even though Sunny had no idea if the dream realm had actual nightingales, the runes described a pretty similar bird. Probably. Translated literally, they meant sings beautifully from the night skies, which could mean either enchanting siren of the night or simply a nocturnal bird. Effie's true name was more straightforward, but also far more morbid. Raised by wolves could mean just that, but a more direct translation had a different meaning. Born from wolves, or born from being eaten alive. Sunny shivered, then deactivated the communicator and closed his eyes for a second. There was one more thing he could do. Summoning the runes once again, he found the description of Weaver's mask and read, "Memory enchantments, mantle of lies." Simple trick. Now that he was an awakened, he could try to activate the mysterious enchantment marked by 3 question marks. Even if all of his essence would be only enough to keep it working for a split second, he could. But he was reluctant to. Sunny knew nothing about the enchantment, but from the boundless, inconceivable pattern of the mask's weave, he got a feeling that it was somehow connected to Eye's vision and sight. He suspected that the vile thieving bird was a cursed devil, at least, and it had been driven mad by just one glance at the reflection in the Weaver's eye. Would something similar happen to him? There were things, after all, that humans weren't meant to see. Even gods struggled with looking at some truths, it seemed. No, not now. Sunny was somewhat willing to risk it, but doing so right now would have been really unwise. What if he passed out from shock? That would transport him to a random spot in the dream realm, and knowing his luck, that spot would be populated by horrors beyond imagination. With a sigh, he dismissed the runes and took out another stimulant patch.
Some other day when I am much, much stronger.
With that, he removed the old patch and put another one in its place.
Time to put all I learned together and make the final decision. What should I choose, stability or danger? Safer road or an unknown path?
2 days later, Sunny was sitting on a bench opposite the entrance to the Academy Hospital complex with a cup of bitter dark coffee in his hand. In his other hand, he was holding a slick communicator. Taking a sip of the terrible drink, Sunny grimaced, then lingered for a few moments inside. Finally, he pressed the call button to contact Master Jet. She answered after a couple of seconds. Her voice sounded a little tense, and there were strange, barely audible whispers mixing with the background noise of the call.
"I awakened Sunless. What? Wait, give me a second."
Something crackled violently, and in the next moment, the background noise was gone.
"Much better, so have you decided?"
Sunny took another sip of coffee and said,
Well, yeah.
He hesitated for a bit, then added,
As far as joining the legacy clans or the government, I've decided against it. I don't know enough and have no leverage to ensure a good deal. Plus, that option will remain open for me in the future even if I stay independent for now. The reverse, however, won't necessarily be true. In any case, it's a serious matter, one that should not be decided upon in a span of just a few days, while suffering from sleep deprivation and stimulant abuse to boot.
Master Jet turned on the video function of the call and smiled. The smile was bright and beautiful, but Sunny couldn't help but notice that right behind her, something was currently on fire.
Makes sense, so then, which citadel?
That was the real question. While Sunny decided to remain independent for now, while leaving himself an opportunity to join a powerful faction later, his choice of an anchor was going to limit which factions he would be able to interact with later on. He was silent for a bit, then said,
Clan Valor Territory.
Master Jet nodded.
Solid choice, Bastion, or a smaller citadel.
Sunny drank some more coffee, then spoke the name of the citadel he had chosen into the communicator. Jet's eyes widened slightly. She didn't say anything for a while, then asked with a bit of surprise in her voice.
Are you absolutely sure?
He nodded.
Yes, I thought about it long and hard.
Master Jet stared at him with a slight frown for a few moments, then shrugged.
Well, okay then, but that might take a couple of days to arrange. The place is too far north and there's not a lot of saints in those parts, but I'll find a way.
Sunny smiled.
Thanks, I really owe you one.
She smiled in response and then winked at him.
Be careful with what you say, Sunless. I might just take you up on the offer and come knocking on your door one day, asking for a favor.
He took a sip of coffee and shrugged.
Sure, no problem. Oh, and call me Sunny, please. Everyone does.
Master Jet blinked a couple of times, then grinned.
All right.
Turning away from the camera, she quickly glanced at something beyond the screen and then added,
Chained aisles, huh? Good luck, Sunny. I hear it's a real hell.
In the vast empty darkness, myriads of distant stars were shimmering with ethereal light. The vista of the night sky was boundless and stark, full of promise and mystery. Above it was another sky, this one blue and bright, full of sunlight and gentle winds. White clouds flowed across it, telling enchanting stories with their movement and shapes. Between the bright sky and the dark sky, an island floated in the air. It was surrounded by freely levitating pieces of rock and ancient masonry. Its surface awash in the soft radiance of the sun, its underbelly veiled by impenetrable darkness. Several gargantuan chains stretched away from the island, cracking thunderously as it slowly rose and fell. The clangor of iron was almost loud enough to drown Sunny's voice. Almost.
Drop-dead bastard and damn you, crap.
Sunny had a good reason to be screaming bloody murder, because he was seconds away from being eaten alive. Near the edge of the flying island, where the forest covering its surface made way for a narrow expanse of patchy grass, a massive wolf-like beast was currently trying to swallow him whole. The nightmare creature was the size of a small truck with fur as tough as steel wire and a long, terrifying muzzle. Its jaws were wide enough to bite a human in half, and strong enough to crush both bones and armor into dust. Currently, those jaws were trying to close on Sunny, and the only thing preventing them from doing so were his hands. He held the upper jaw of the beast with one, and the lower jaw with another, trying with all his strength to keep them open. His muscles felt as though they were about to explode. The abomination was also trying to bite down on the hateful human with all of its tremendous might, but for the moment, neither of them could overpower the other. It was just a matter of time, though. Sunny was burning through his essence to augment his physical strength, and those reserves were not endless. When the well of power ran dry, he would lose this contest.
Not good.
About 2 months had passed after he had chosen to come to this place, and now, Sunny was starting to seriously doubt his decision. Why didn't he just go to Bastion? He would be safe and sound behind its walls right now, maybe even in the embrace of a beautiful. As though trying to add insult to injury, the nightmare creature interrupted his thought by letting out a deafening growl and doubling its efforts to devour him. Sunny felt a putrid wind brush past his face and grimaced miserably. The stench coming out of the beast's maw was unbearable.
Just don't faint.
His hands trembled, and the terrible fangs of the beast came a few centimeters closer to sinking into his flesh. Sunny gritted his teeth and then yelled,
Saint, a little help here, damn it.
But the taciturn demon was nowhere to be seen. She was a good couple 100 meters away, standing atop a low hill. Sunny groaned and tried to push the jaws of the abomination away, but it was useless. The damn creature was just too strong. A few seconds later, though, something hissed past his shoulders, and 2 menacing black arrows sunk into the feral eyes of the beast. They arrived almost simultaneously.
Well, thanks.
Using the momentary shudder that ran through the wolf's body, Sunny pushed the jaws sideways, allowed them to close with a loud crack, and poured as much essence as he could into a vicious throw. The massive body of the nightmare creature flew for good 10 meters and crashed into a trunk of an ancient oak, plowing straight through and turning it into splinters. Sunny fell to his knees and drew in a shaky breath. Then he quickly glanced back, far in the distance. A graceful dark silhouette was outlined against the bright sky. Saint held a powerful memory bow in her hands, its limbs made out of horn and polished black wood. 2 ruby eyes burned behind the visor of her helmet, and a crimson coral gem was set into the center of her obsidian breastplate.
Nice shots.
She wouldn't be able to help him any further, though, at least not for a dozen seconds. Sunny was pretty sure that the shadow had spent all of her arrows while they were fighting with the pack, and now she had to dismiss and summon them anew. At least the leader of the monstrous wolves was now blind. Probably. Not that it was going to stop the bastard. The nightmare creature was already rising from the ground, howling furiously.
Curse you.
Panting, Sunny crawled a few steps and picked up the midnight shard. The austere takai was as sharp and deadly as ever. The problem was that the last remaining abomination was clearly of the fallen rank, so the stalwart blade was having trouble breaking through its hide. Still, Sunny had to work with what he had. Making sure that the sun was behind him, he stood up and leaned on his sword, watching tiredly as the massive beast turned its ugly head and faced him. The dreadful wolf lowered its muzzle to the ground, then growled with murderous rage. Bits of saliva flew from its maw and fell to the ground. Then, pushing with its mighty hind legs, the nightmare creature lunged at Sunny. Covering the distance between them in an instant, the beast brought its terrible jaws on the tiny human once again, and bit on emptiness. In the place where Sunny stood just a moment ago, there was now nothing but air, light, and shadows. Appearing from the nightmare creature's own shadow, Sunny dove between its hind legs and thrust the midnight shard upward, aiming at the soft belly of the fearsome beast. The takai pierced the pale skin without much problem and sunk into the flesh of the abomination. As blood poured to the ground, the creature staggered and fell. A low whine escaped from its mouth. Very soon it was all over. Falling onto the ground in complete exhaustion, Sunny tried to catch his breath and listen to the silence. Soon, he heard the sweet sound of the spell whispering.
You have slain a fallen monster, dread wolf. Your shadow grows stronger.
Sunny lay still for a while, then summoned the runes and looked at the dreadful number. Shadow fragments, 197,000, he sighed. The task of pursuing power had turned out to be much more difficult than he had anticipated, and for one simple reason. After becoming an awakened, he now received fewer fragments from killing nightmare creatures. If before he could get 2 by slaying an awakened monster, now it was 1. If before he could receive 4 by slaying a fallen monster, now it was 2. What's worse? His hopes of growing strong by hunting down scores of dormant creatures had been mercilessly crushed, because he didn't receive any fragments from killing those weaker than him at all, which was a real disappointment. Who didn't love punching down? Sunny was at the very bottom of the power structure for most of his life, so he had been really looking forward to having an opportunity to bully something weaker than him for a change. Alas, it had turned out to be a waste of his time. Of course. Sunny had also become tremendously more powerful. He could handle himself in a fight with fallen beasts and even monsters, especially with the help of Saint. That was the only reason why he had not fallen off behind Nephi's, who was still alive somewhere in the dream realm and growing more powerful with each day. He had not managed to diminish the gap between them by a lot, but at least he was not worse off than at the start of this. Thinking of changing star, Sunny looked into the distance. A somber expression appeared on his face. Think about something else. There was only one bright side to all of this. While dormant creatures did not bring him any shadow fragments, they did bring him memories, and those memories could be fed to Saint. Her own counter now showed. Shadow fragments, 157,200.
Not bad.
A low, eerie sound of giant iron links scraping against each other interrupted his thoughts. The island Sunny was currently on seemed to have entered the ascending phase, so his time here was running short. Standing up with a sigh, Sunny summoned the moonlight shard and walked over to the corpse of the dread wolf. He had to retrieve the soul shards before it was too late. The Chained Isles. The Chained Isles were a strange place, situated at the very north of the territories claimed by humans. They bordered the Hollow Mountains. That was one of the reasons why Sunny had chosen that region as his hunting grounds, but it wasn't the only one. The whole region consisted of numerous islands that somehow floated in the air, connected to each other by gargantuan iron chains. It was mostly unexplored, and the awakened population here was not very large. Notably, there were not a lot of masters and saints here, especially those associated with the legacy clans, be it great or lesser. What the Chained Island had in abundance instead were the nightmare creatures of all kinds, from dormant ones to awakened fallen, and terrifying corrupted abominations. Each island had its own menagerie of horrors, and the level of threat differed from one to another. Most were utterly deadly, though, much more deadly than an average awakened was supposed to be able to handle. But Sunny was not an average awakened. To him, this was a perfect hunting ground, a place where he could sharpen his blade without being seen by those who served the sovereigns, or at least he had thought that way at the start. Right now, he was starting to suspect that it was more of a place where he could die terribly without being seen by anyone who would have been able to help. Just like Master Jet said, the Chained Islands were a hellish land, and not only because of the nightmare creatures. The place itself was capable of killing a person, or rather, its sky could. High above the floating island, there was the usual sky with the sun, the moon, and beautiful stars that shined brightly at night. However, there was another sky in this strange land, the one that was below the islands. It was always dark, and the ethereal lights burning at an unimaginable distance in its vast expanse only looked like the stars. No one really knew what they were. The only thing that humans knew was that the sky below was seemingly endless. On his first day on the Isles, Sunny had asked what was down there. The answer he received was simple. Nothing. Descending into the below was not immediately dangerous, but there was nothing there. Some crazy daredevil had once fought his way through the hunting grounds of nightmare creatures that dwelled beneath the islands and spent a whole week flying straight down. He had to turn back, eventually, because out there in the boundless darkness, his mind began to show signs of breaking apart. Even the winged echo he used to descend into the below had almost gone insane. But other than being absolutely empty, the sky below did not seem to pose a threat. Flying above the Chained Isles, however, was rather deadly. The higher one went, the more crushing their weight would become, until they would either fall down or their body would simply implode. That was why every human on the Chained Isles knew to pay attention to the sound of rattling chains. Every island in the region went through cycles of ascending and descending, and as they rose too high, the pressure on their surface grew tremendously, to the point where it was impossible to move or breathe. Ideally, Sunny had to get off the ascending island before that happened. He should not have been lingering to retrieve the soul shards from the corpses of the monstrous wolves he and Saint had killed, really. But his eyes glistened with avarice. Soul shards meant money, and if there was one thing Sunny really enjoyed, it was making money. No amount was ever enough. An independent awakened like him had a lot of expenses.
Fine, it's fine, I'll be off this thing in no time.
He quickly cut the dead beasts apart and fished out the soul shards from inside their bodies. Hiding the beautiful crystals in his pack, Sunny hesitated for a little, then sent his essence flowing and tossed the first corpse off the edge of the island. He was planning to come back here soon, and leaving so much meat lying around could make the future visit rather problematic. Sunny only had one more carcass to dispose of when he suddenly noticed a swift silhouette descending from the skies. Commanding Saint to hide herself in the shadows, he summoned the Midnight Shard and looked up tensely. What the hell? Surrounded by a halo of sunlight, a majestic griffin was quickly approaching the island. At first, Sunny assumed that it was a nightmare creature, but then noticed a human figure on the monster's back. A human rider meant that the magnificent griffin was an echo. Sunny's face grew dim. Very few people could have such an echo on the Chained Isles, and out of those, he was pretty sure that he knew the identity of the unwelcomed visitor. The griffin folded its white wings and dove down, then opened them up near the ground to slow its fall. Sunny raised his hand to cover his eyes from the dust that was sent into the air by the powerful gust of wind. Strong. The mighty beast shone with ethereal light and disintegrated into a rain of sparks, letting the rider land nimbly on the ground. He regained his balance swiftly and straightened, then turned to Sunny. The man in front of him was tall and had broad, powerful shoulders. He was wearing a light armor crafted from the adamantine scales of an unknown monster, with a blue scarf wrapped carelessly around his neck. His hair was the color of straw, as was his manly beard. The stranger's eyes were bright blue and dangerously attentive. Sunny stared at the man for a moment, then bowed respectfully, hiding his face in the process.
Master Roan.
Indeed, the man in front of him was none other than Ascended Roan of the White Feather clan, one of the only 3 masters on the Chained Isles. Well, there were probably only 3. Unlike the Forgotten Shore, this region of the Dream Realm had several gateways. 2 were found, conquered, and turned into citadels by humans, both Sunny and Master Roan, as well as pretty much everyone else on the Chained Isles, belonged to one of them, the Sanctuary of Noctis. That citadel was ruled by the White Feather clan, which was one of the vassal clans to the great clan Valor. The second citadel was rather mysterious. It was situated at the very edge of the region, near the dreaded Hollow Mountains, and belonged to Valor itself. Only those in direct service to the great clan were anchored at its gateway, so Sunny had no idea what went on there, and how powerful the awakened stationed at the citadel were. He did, however, know a bit about Master Roan. The man was married to the only saint on the Chained Isles, after all. Roan looked Sunny up and down, then gave him a friendly smile.
Do we know each other?
Sunny shook his head.
No, sir, we haven't met before. I have just awakened a couple of months ago, so I am new to the Chained Isles.
The strapping master nodded, and then glanced at the carcass of a fallen wolf that Sunny had failed to throw over the edge of the island in time. When Roan turned to him again, there was a measured look in his piercing blue eyes.
Did you kill that beast?
Sunny lingered for a few moments, then nodded.
Yeah, I can be very lucky on occasion.
The tall man shook his head.
This is a fallen beast. Ah, you must be Sunless then, from the Forgotten Shore.
Sunny smiled. Curses, he knows my name. He had nothing against the older man, but preferred to remain unknown and underestimated, especially when dealing with legacies.
Yeah, that's me.
Master Roan nodded, as though everything suddenly made sense, and then briefly looked at the sky.
You should know that it is dangerous to remain on an ascending island, right? Why are you still here?
Sunny hesitated for a few moments, then shrugged.
I was just about to leave and escape to the next one over when you appeared, sir.
The tall man sighed.
Yeah, that's what I figured. You've spent all your luck on that beast, though it seems all 3 of the island connected to this one are also ascending. You wouldn't have been able to escape even if you left on time.
Sunny stared at him for a while, a sour expression appearing on his face. Damn it.
And what about that beautiful griffin of yours, sir? Surely it can bring us both away to safety.
Roan grinned.
He is rather beautiful, ain't he? Well, not that it matters. In theory, we can dive below the islands and escape through the sky below, but believe me, you wouldn't want to meet the things that dwell on the dark side of the Isles. Even I prefer to avoid those things.
Sunny blinked.
Then what do we do?
The tall man laughed.
I guess you're about to experience your first crushing Sunless. Don't worry though, the chains of this island are on the shorter side, so it won't ascend too high, well, most likely. And I'll be here to bring you back to the Citadel if you pass out, provided that we survive, of course.
Great. This wasn't Sunny's first crushing, actually, and that was exactly why he didn't want to experience it again. But there was no other choice, it seemed. With a sigh, he dismissed Saint, who had been hiding in the shadows all along, and took off his pack. Then Sunny found a soft-looking patch of grass and placed it on the ground. Behind him, Master Roan dismissed his scale armor and unwrapped his scarf, then tied it around his waist. The less weight was on the human body during the crushing. The easier it was to endure, and the more chances of survival there were. However, the puppeteer's shroud was made mostly out of soft fabric, so Sunny left it on. He also wanted to neither reveal nor dismiss the soul serpent. As the giant chains groaned and rang thunderously, and the island rose higher and higher, the 2 of them lay on the grass and prepared to be crushed. Master Roan stared at Sunny's slender physique, then at his own mighty muscles, and sighed with envy. The Chained Isles was one of the very few places in the Dream Realm where being small and light was an advantage.
If you feel like passing out, turn your head to the side. Wouldn't want to suffocate on your own spit or vomit, right? Sorry for being crass, kid.
Sunny grimaced and thanked the older man in a suppressed voice. He was already feeling an invisible force pushing him into the ground. Sunny muttered, "This is going to suck." As though answering his thoughts, the invisible force suddenly grew stronger, crashing into him like a giant hammer. Laying on the soft grass, Sunny felt his body grow heavier and heavier still. The island continued to rise into the sunlit sky, and with each minute the crushing pressure became slightly more unbearable. The ancient forest covering its surface bent, a rain of leaves falling to the ground. The mighty trees lowered their branches almost as though trying to touch the ground. With a loud crack, a few weaker ones broke and plunged down, showering everything around with sharp splinters. Sunny grimaced, feeling his whole body struggle under the strain. He could still move and breathe without too much trouble, at least for now. Soon, the island would rise high enough to make any kind of movement almost impossible. And if he was especially unlucky, it would continue to ascend, eventually making it hard to even inhale. Hopefully, the chains would draw taut long before that. The skies above the chained isles were beautiful, but also forbidden. Nothing could survive their crushing embrace. Neither humans, nor nightmare creatures, nor anything else. Well, except for one thing. Shifting his gaze, Sunny looked straight up and found the shape of the ivory tower drifting high above the world, wrapped in a veil of clouds. The ivory tower was the only thing that seemed to be capable of withstanding the deadly pressure of the forbidden sky. It was a tall, magnificent pagoda built out of flawlessly white material that was neither stone nor wood. The island on which it stood was very small, barely wider than the base of the tower itself, and surrounded by drifting slabs of shattered marble. 7 broken chains hung from the soil of the island, swaying as it moved. The ivory tower was visible in the sky both during the day, bathed in sunlight, and at night, glowing beautifully with the reflected radiance of the moon. No one knew what the mysterious structure was, and why it remained untouched by the obliterating force that destroyed everything else that dared to rise above the chained isles. Since no one had ever managed to withstand the ever-growing crushing to get anywhere near it, many even believed it to be a mirage. Sunny muttered a quiet curse under his breath. The island on which Sunny had the misfortune of getting stuck had finally reached the highest point of its ascent and shook violently as the chains connecting it to other isles drew taut. The pressure at this height was torturous, but not deadly. His bones were not breaking under the assault of the crushing, and he could still breathe. Even if with great effort, it would have been better if Sunny could wrap the second shadow around his body, but he didn't want to appear too strong in front of Master Roan. Speaking of the devil, the mighty rider chose that exact moment to speak. His voice sounded a little strained.
Hey, Sunless, can you breathe all right?
Sunny gritted his teeth and struggled to speak. In the end, all he could manage was an affirmative grunt.
Good, good. This is actually not that rough as far as crushing goes. If we rose by another 100 meters, though, even I would be having a bad time.
Sunny thought to himself that it was good to know. At this point, Sunny was regretting that they had not climbed on the griffin and dove into the sky below. The chained isles was a dangerous place, and the nightmare creatures living on them were fearsome and powerful beyond belief. However, the creatures living under the islands were much, much worse. Sunny had seen them from afar a couple of times, and the mere memory of those horrors was enough to send a shudder running through his entire body. Still, they could have fought their way through, probably. It would have been better than this diabolical torture, for sure. Sunny let out a pained groan, but there was nothing he could do now except grit his teeth and endure. Minute after minute, hour after hour. Sunny couldn't even think properly because of how terrible the pressure of the boundless skies was. All he could do was suffer silently and stare at the ivory tower. His shadow, on the other hand, was having a great time. It didn't move, reluctant to get noticed by Master Roan. But he could feel it stare at him gloatingly.
Bastard, I'm going to wrap you around the ordinary rock and make it scream without rest for 24 hours straight. Let's see who's going to be gloating then.
The shadow hesitated for a bit, then awkwardly pretended to be interested in something else and looked away. Sunny muttered that that was right. Somewhere in the forest, another tree exploded with a loud crack. Sunny tried to turn his head to look in that direction, but it demanded too much effort. He didn't have to worry about being attacked by nightmare creatures in this helpless state anyway. They were currently hiding in their lairs, enduring the crushing the same way he was. Who could fight under this hellish pressure? Sunny felt as though there was a mountain on his chest. Every breath demanded his utmost effort to make. His whole being ached, and his vision had become blurry. Exhausted, he closed his eyes and circulated the shadow essence through the coils of the soul serpent to keep his slowly breaking body going.
Damn it, I'll be late to wake up, won't I? When were they going to call? In the morning. Such an important call, and I'm about to miss it.
He was starting to feel really hurt when the blessed sound of rattling chains finally reached his ears once again. Sunny breathed a sigh of relief and thanked the gods. After about 4 hours, the island had finally begun to move again, entering its descent phase. Little by little, the crushing pressure began to grow weaker. Master Roan sighed with relief by his side.
The worst part is over. Just wait a little bit more, kid. You're almost there.
Sunny glanced at the older man and sighed. He used to hate it when people called him kid, but not anymore, at least not as much. He just felt a little wistful. He didn't feel like a kid. Not for a long time now. Not since coming back from the forgotten shore. A dozen long and torturous minutes later, the island descended enough for them to move and then slowly stand up. The crushing was over. Sunny slowly rolled on his stomach, then rose to his knees. He was breathing heavily, and his whole body felt as though it had just gone through a meat grinder. Master Roan, on the other hand, looked almost unperturbed. The rider was already on his feet, tying the blue scarf around his neck with a relaxed expression on his face. The forest around them let out an almost human sigh of relief. The ancient trees creaked and cracked, rising their branches back toward the sun. Those that had broken remained on the ground, adding to the nearly impenetrable layer of deadfall. Sunny glanced at the older man with a bit of envy, then stood up and tried to shake off his exhaustion. After spending a few minutes resting and drinking greedily from the endless spring, he almost felt alive again. Glancing at the tall man, he asked,
How are you able to fly up there on your griffin? I mean, no offense, but that seems like something only a crazy person would do.
Roan laughed.
I don't rise too high unless I really have to. Usually, you can fly above the descending islands without experiencing too much pressure. After a while, you develop a sense of how much your body can handle and for how long. He massaged his broad shoulders and added, a note of pride in his voice. Plus, I am a master after all. I can withstand much more than an awakened would. You did exceptionally well, however. To be honest, I was pretty sure that I would have to abandon my patrol to bring your bleeding body back to the sanctuary at full speed, then throw it into the gateway. I guess it's true what they say about you forgotten shore kids.
Sunny blinked a couple of times and asked cautiously,
And what do they say?
The older man smiled.
Tough as nails, disturbingly indifferent to pain and fear, strong, almost scary. Scary children, that was the exact phrase I heard.
Sunny lingered for a few moments, then scoffed.
Indifferent to pain and fear? What nonsense. I pride myself on being a coward. As one should, what's wrong with being a coward? Fear keeps people alive while bravery gets them killed. As for pain, no thank you. I have been beaten, burned, crushed, drowned, cut, stabbed, pierced, bitten, chewed, and gutted enough times for several lifetimes already.
As Master Roan gave him a strange look, Sunny raised an eyebrow.
What?
The tall man shook his head, then scratched his chin and said in a wondering tone,
No, nothing. It's just, if that is true, Sunless, then what are you doing here on the Chained Isles? Shouldn't you be having a nice time in a safe place like Bastion?
Sunny looked away in embarrassment, then coughed.
Everyone knows that, I think. Anyway, don't tell anyone about what I've just said. I don't want the competition.
He grinned and watched as Master Roan stared at him with an incredulous expression. After a while, the older man said,
You are a strange fellow, you know that.
Sunny shrugged.
Everyone knows that, I think. Anyway, don't tell anyone about what I've just said. I don't want the competition.
The tall man blinked a couple of times, then smiled.
No problem. Do you need me to take you back to the sanctuary? Or will you be fine returning on your own?
Sunny thought for a bit, then said,
I'll be fine. It's not that far anyway. If I make haste, I'll be back before morning and go straight back to the real world. I have business to attend to there actually.
Master Roan nodded and patted Sunny on the shoulder.
All right, then I'll be on my way. It's been nice meeting you, Sunless. If you need anything in the future, don't hesitate to find me in the sanctuary.
With that, he summoned his echo. A sea of white sparks appeared out of thin air and swirled, slowly turning into the figure of the mighty griffin. The winged beast towered above Sunny like a gargantuan mix between a lion, an eagle, and a pure nightmare. Slowly, it lowered its head, staring at him with two beautiful, inhuman eyes. Its beak looked about as fearsome and terrifying as that of a spire messenger. Sunny tensed a little and took a couple of steps back, prepared to dissipate into the shadows at any moment. He didn't really think that Master Roan would suddenly attack him, but being paranoid was better than being dead. The tall man summoned his armor, then easily jumped on the griffin's back and raised a fist to bid Sunny farewell. In the next moment, the echo stretched its wings and pushed itself off the ground, sending a squall of hurricane wind in all directions. Sunny struggled to remain on his feet, and then looked as the griffin flew into the distance. Slowly, a friendly expression disappeared from his face.
Well, what do you know?
Famed Master had turned out to be a rather pleasant person. Granted, he was a legacy by marriage and not by birth. Still, Sunny had expected to be treated with a lot more disdain and contempt, at best hidden behind a mask of false courtesy. Come to think of it, the saint governing the chained isles herself was pretty down to earth, if a bit cold. Not that Sunny had a lot of opportunities to interact with her after that first day when she had brought him to the sanctuary. With a sigh, he walked over to the carcass of the monstrous wolf and sent it flying over the edge of the island with a frustrated push. The corpse of the abominable beast plummeted down and soon disappeared into the darkness of the sky below. Making sure that nothing appeared from beneath the island to snatch it, Sunny lingered on the edge for a couple of minutes, then sighed, and jumped into the bottomless abyss himself. Falling through the boundless blue skies with the wind whistling in his ears, Sunny threw his hands to the sides and summoned the dark wing. As the translucent memory weaved itself from light behind his back, he shifted his weight and allowed the air resistance to push him off course, effectively turning left. A few seconds after that, he activated the enchantment of his cloak and slowed down his fall, simultaneously turning the downward momentum into a forward push. In these past 2 months, Sunny had become somewhat proficient in navigating the sky. Cutting a smooth arc in the air, he swiftly approached one of the gargantuan chains connecting the forest island to another, flew above it for a few minutes, and landed nimbly on one of the massive links. The giant chain swayed lightly beneath his feet. Somewhere behind him, it rose and merged with the soil of the island. In front of him, there was a vast expanse of empty heavens, here on the border to the sky below. It was currently twilight. The chain stretched into the distance, disappearing into the darkness of the void a few hundred meters away. As the dark wing turned from a blur back into a transparent cloak, Sunny sighed and walked forward. Each link of the heavenly chain was as wide as a road, so he didn't need to be afraid of falling off. Approaching the connection between two links, Sunny either jumped down or glided up to the next one. Walking across the length of the chain that was drawn between the bottomless abyss below and the boundless sky above, he soon left the light of the sun behind and entered into the eternal darkness of the below. Here, there was no wind and no sound, only silence. If not for the swaying of the chain, Sunny would have thought that he had entered a completely new world. A myriad of ghostly lights were burning somewhere far below, pretending to be stars, making sure that no one was watching him. Sunny lingered for a few moments, and then dove into the iron surface of the chain. His body turned into an incorporeal shadow and merged with the darkness enshrouding it. Here in the sky below, he was in his natural element after all. Sunny couldn't travel through the empty darkness itself, but the chains were covered by an impenetrable veil of shadows. He could swim through them for as long as he had essence to spare, safe from the terrible creatures that lived on the dark side of the chained aisles. Rushing forward with terrible speed, Sunny slid over the surface of the chain and flew through the darkness like a ghost. He went faster and then faster still, circling around the chain several times and leaving the forest island far behind. Covering the distance to the next isle in mere minutes, he escaped from the shadows the moment the sunlight touched the iron chain once again and shot upward in a spin. The dark wing turned into a blur, pushing him even further up. Sunny soared above the floating island and then glided smoothly to its surface, landing on solid ground with a light step. This one was much different from the one where he had fought the monstrous wolves. Instead of a forest of twisted trees, the isle was covered by jagged rocks, with an ancient ruin standing lonesomely in its center. Sunny had explored the massive structure already, and wasn't interested in visiting it again, jumping from one shadow to another. He avoided the nightmare creatures populating the island and soon approached its other edge. Technically, from here, he only needed to cross 2 more aisles to reach the sanctuary. However, one of those aisles was home to a dreadful and utterly terrifying corrupted monster, so he was going to have to make a big detour. Sunny looked at the sun and then jumped off the edge once again. Just like that, he traveled from one island to another for a few hours, when possible. Sunny turned into a shadow and rushed along the lengths of heavenly chains, then emerged from the darkness and traversed the islands themselves on foot. Each island was different from another. Some were desolate and bleak, some covered by grass and vegetation. One was full of beautiful white flowers, while another hid a clear, tranquil lake. A few were covered by ash and flames, while several were covered by the ruins that some ancient civilization had left behind. If there was one thing that united all of them, it was that each was dangerous in its own way. The desolate islands were home to swarms of monstrous, gluttonous ants. The grass covered the maws of giant abominations that hid beneath, waiting for prey to step into their trap. The vegetation was predatory and deadly if one wasn't careful to not get too close. The beautiful white flowers could put a person to sleep from which they would never wake up. The tranquil lake was home to a creature so terrifying that Sunny did not even dare to approach its clear waters, and these ones were on the safer side as far as the chained aisles went. Due to their proximity to the sanctuary, they were well explored, and anything dangerous enough to pose threat to the citadel had long been destroyed by St. Tyrus herself. Sunny had been to these islands already, too, so he knew his way around them. Each was either descending or ascending. The former were easier to cross, while the latter forced him to walk while suffering from the early stages of the crushing. If an island he wanted to use was too high, Sunny had to change his plan and seek out another way. After a while, his reserve of shadow essence became dangerously low. Knowing that he will have to make a stop, Sunny chose a relatively safe island and headed toward it. Gliding to the surface, Sunny tiredly dismissed the dark wing and looked around. The island he was currently standing on was rather close to the sanctuary and usually empty of any nightmare creatures. However, it was wise to make sure. Sending his shadows in different directions to scout for potential danger, Sunny sat on the ground and summoned the endless spring. When his thirst was satiated, he crossed his legs, put his hands on his knees, and closed his eyes, concentrating on the coils of the soul serpent. With a part of his mind observing the world through the shadows, and another concentrated on hastening the accumulation of shadow essence, he meditated for a while, and then suddenly opened his eyes. One of the shadows had noticed something interesting.